Okay, we got a lot to do. I do want to make one announcement. Mark your calendars. We have a lot of shredding to do in terms of getting the legislative and proposals hammered out as to what's going to be in the Sober Homes Task Force legislation this year. The session starts in January. I've got to get something to the legislative Palm Beach County legislative delegation by the end of September. So we're going to be spending a great deal of time on some proposals that have been submitted today, and we're going to be meeting on September 20th. It'll be a shorter meeting. All we'll be dealing with is legislation. Okay, so that would be September 20th. It's out of order. We usually every 2 months, so we're going to have one in September. Legislation only. Everybody's welcome, public, everybody.
Al, at 1 o'clock?
Let's go over some of.
Al?
Yes.
At 1 o'clock on the 20th? Do we
Yeah,
know that yet?
You 1 o'clock. You know, if people can't make it at 1, like I said, it'll be shorter. We can make it at 2. That time is flexible, but the 20th is is going to be the hard date. Okay, can you get the my stats up there? Okay, medical examiner. You all have seen the first one, but I just want to bring it to your attention again. We've been doing pretty well in Palm Beach County.
Hang on, wait.
Go ahead.
Okay, go for it.
All right. We've been doing better than the rest of the state, a lot better than the rest of the state in terms of opioid overdoses, overdose deaths, the morbidity rate. And in 21, we were down about 13 or 14% over 20 when we had, I think, 602 or 603 opioid overdose deaths. We went down to 519. 91% had fentanyl either cause or presence. So in 22, we've got no pending cases. We're done. We'll be getting the FDLE statewide medical examiner report probably at the end of November. Last year we got it the first week in December. But we do know the numbers for Palm Beach County, and we went down 19% over 21. So over the course of 2 years, we had a 13% and a 19% decrease in opioid overdose deaths. Fentanyl, however, is inching up. In 2022, it was present or cause in 93% of all opioid deaths. Xylazine had 40 OD deaths. NPE had 20, and it was 0 in 2021. And fluorofentanyl had 100, where it had 6. Now we're going to go to the next slide, which is this year is a partial snapshot. As of August 28th, means there's a bunch of cases outstanding. We still haven't, we don't know what's going to happen in the next 3 months, but 4 months actually. But with 2/3 of the year gone, we're remarkably the same as last year. We haven't gone up. We're statistically the same as we were last year. If you look at those numbers, again, snapshot, 92% fentanyl analog cause or presence. We've had 259 total opioid overdose deaths as of August 21st, with some cases outstanding that have already been identified as potential overdoses. And in 2022, we had at the same time last year, same situation, cases outstanding, 259. This year it's 254. Fentanyl has gone up a couple of percentage points, but again, statistically, it's not significant. What is significant, if you go to the bottom of the slide, fluorofentanyl went from 67 in 2022 at this time of the year, 2/3 in, and this year it's 37. So it looks like fluorofentanyl is reduced this year, 23 as opposed to 22. NPE also significant. We've had none in 2023. We had 9 in 2022 at this time of the year. And with regard to xylazine, which is non-opioid, but it's a animal tranquilizer, we've had 20 so far this year. No, I'm sorry, 20 in 2022. So far this year, we have 16, so slightly less, but again, statistically not significant. One more slide, fire rescue. We continue the downward trend. This is partial. So year over year from 2017, notable that we're 58% reduction, and this is only Palm Beach County Fire Rescue, which is approximately 50% of the opioid calls or the suspected overdose, drug overdose calls. See how bad we were in 2017 through July, and most years except for 2020 when the pandemic hit, we've gone down. So we're continuing that trend. Okay, that's it for me. And now FAR, Michael, and I'm sorry, we're going to push FAR down further in the agenda because they're having trouble with their internet. So let's go to Oxford House. Michael, you want to go over the Oxford House stats? Very impressive for both FAR and Oxford House, the increase over the last 2 months.
He's gonna share his own screen.
You share your screen, Mike?
Can you enable sharing?
Have you enabled sharing?
You should be good to go.
You're good to go.
Right. So yeah, I'm Michael McKeough. I'm the regional manager for Oxford House in Florida. Here are the stats that we're currently at in the state. We've gone up a little bit. We're at 146 houses with 1,338 beds. 95 of those are men's houses, 872 beds for men, 28 women's houses with 248 beds, 23 women and children's houses with 218 beds. I won't read all these, but these are the cities that we're currently in. We had a couple new ones to the list with Sarasota and DeLand. Still working on a few others. And we're going to start really working on some rural areas as well in the state. Continue working on that. We did have one fatal overdose in the Tallahassee area since this last meeting. Oxford House has been partnering with Mobilize Recovery nationwide to work on different service projects for Recovery Month. Currently, we're at about 28 different events happening throughout the state. These are member-driven events, and so our membership are getting involved in their communities to do different service-oriented events, whether it's participating in Narcan distribution or just working at the animal shelter. They're doing a lot of cool things and just providing to the community. Let's see. Every year, and it's kind of a growing thing, Oxford Houses in Florida have been doing Clean Feet on the Beach. We've been doing it in several different cities. This coming September, I believe we'll be doing it in 7 different cities, beach locations. The Clean Feet on the Beach is open to the community, but it's put on by Oxford House, and it's really to celebrate individuals in recovery and to show people that long-term success can be had in recovery. And so it's been a growing thing. We've had some really good turnouts in the past, and we want to continue doing that. Currently, I'm in DC, and we're having our World Convention where we're sending 112 of our residents. And that was paid for solely by donations, membership, being able to raise funds to where no individual had to come out of their pocket to come on this trip to see and experience Oxford House in this grand fashion. We're staying at the Gaylord National Resort, and so it's a really cool experience for somebody that's early in recovery, in the first year in recovery, to be able to come to this amazing hotel and experience different panels. I think they're having the ONDCP is coming. The Surgeon General is going to show up, and we're going to have some really cool events and different speakers for them to participate with. And yeah, so the Oxford House movement is continuing to grow throughout the state. We're really focusing on maintaining the quality of the homes, and so we're planning regular training sessions to focus on what the Oxford House model is. These are going to be events that are done quarterly in different regions throughout the state. These are things that we do and we have been doing, but this will be on a grander scale, more in depth, and to really just kind of focus on and hone down on what the Oxford House model looks like and how to keep it going. We have an upcoming state workshop, and that's going to be in March of this coming year. And that's going to be, it's kind of in the Northwest Volusia area in Paisley, Florida. And then we have our World Convention again in 2024, and that's going to be in Florida, in Orlando. And so it's a good, cool event that we're looking forward to. And then all of the state or all of the areas are participating in Narcan administration trainings. We have Narcan within the houses. Everybody's well aware of where Narcan is located in our houses and how to use it properly. We continue to stay on top of that. These are my contact and Lori's contact information, our different websites, and that is it.
Thank you, Michael. You're being modest. I just want to call attention to the fact that you have 1338 beds as of today. That number 2 months ago was, I think, 1,211. So that's roughly a 10% increase. Not too shabby in 60 days. Because many of us here on the task force can remember a few brief years ago when there were no Oxford houses in the state of Florida. And now you've got 146. A very, very impressive, very efficient, very needed. Housing is needed on the level 1, level 2 area. I do have one question. I thought I had asked Lori last time to kind of check into this, but maybe not. The Oxford view of MAT. Do you keep statistics as to the MAT-friendly Oxford houses, or do you leave that alone?
Yeah, all Oxford houses are MAT friendly, so all Oxford houses will accept people on any of the medically assisted treatments, whether it's naloxone, Suboxone, methadone, Sublocade, and that's across the board. We do have quite a few members in Oxford House on medically assisted treatments.
All right, good to hear, because that impacts one of the legislative proposals that we'll be discussing later on regarding MAT in recovery residences. So thank you. Any questions, any comments on the last 2 updates? Seeing none, I do want to take this opportunity. Oh yes, Ariana did. No, that's me. It's my it's my cursor. Sorry. Okay, I do want to make mention, and I've been remiss. I meant to do this earlier at the last meeting, of the passing of Dr. Scott Rice, former a task force member from the beginning, pretty much. I remember him at the meetings in 2016 and 17. Incredibly intelligent. Pharmacology was his major suit, but he had doctorates in several areas. Very helpful in the early days of us getting through some of the morass of what's a best practice, what should be a best practice, and we'll miss him a lot. Okay, now we're going to reorder some of the agenda, but we are going to have Dr. Annie Peters. She's up now. This isn't the annual report. Actually, that was my mistake. This is really, how force, a little discussion again for those who don't know what force is, but about force and how force impacts or can impact housing and recovery housing. So Annie, you want to share your screen, I think?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Annie Peters. I work with Nikki at NATAP, and Let me share my screen here. We go. So I know you've heard me talk about force before. So if you've been on one of these calls where I presented before, so I don't want to do the same presentation. I'm going to give you just a brief reminder of what force is, or for those of you who don't know what it is, that'll be a brief reminder. But then I wanted to just see if there were comments or about whether or not something like this would be useful for recovery residences, Oxford houses, et cetera, what those entities are doing as far as outcomes measurement, and whether there is a potential to have treatment and recovery support data in the same place. Obviously not comparing apples and oranges, but in general, what force looks at is who do we serve, what services are we providing, and what outcomes are we observing. And when you think of it that way, that would certainly apply to whether it's an outpatient MAT clinic, or it's an OTP, or it's a recovery home, or it's in a residential treatment center, or a therapist who does outpatient psychotherapy. Just the idea of standardizing what is an outcome for substance use disorders and how do we measure that across different systems and across providers of different kinds of services is a really interesting thing to think about. And that's really why FORCE exists. FORCE was created by NATAP, the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers, in order to really help service providers, any type of service, to look at outcomes, look at their outcomes, and have a way to compare their own outcomes with those of other service providers. And so I just have a general slide here of how we did this, because, even if, I just talked to someone from a national group of physician health programs, physician health support, physician programs for people with substance use disorders and mental health issues. And they said, maybe we'll recreate something that we can do to look at outcomes in PHPs. And I said, great, if any of this is helpful, and even if it's not part of FORCE, this is really what, we're a nonprofit and we just want people to be measuring their outcomes. So this is essentially how we did it. Is we said, what are the key performance metrics? What are the things we want to measure? And you're already looking at things like overdose statistics and things like that. But what would be the types of measures that are the metrics? What do you want to see improved? What's the mission of each organization, and how do you measure that mission? And then choosing standardized measures. There's so many measures out there that it doesn't make too much sense to create a bunch of new measures, but just picking one or two and then establishing a centralized database, creating a simple way to submit data to look at it in aggregate, and then developing some, that's what FORCE does, is developing deliverables of value to service providers. So that includes reports about outcomes, comparisons, benchmarking with other providers, and also research output. So as far as key metrics being created by treatment providers, this is what treatment providers were looking at: identified patient, or you can say the person served. What are their demographics, their social determinants? What do they have with respect to mental health and substance use? Is there, what's their primary substance, if you can identify one? What's the service? If they're getting treatment, is it, what level of care is it? How long do they stay? Are they using MAT? And are they using recovery support? That's another thing we measure as well. And then for outcomes, there's so many outcome measures that exist, but essentially the key domains are, what are they using? Are they functioning in their lives? What is their physical and mental health? And what's their quality of life? And there's lots and lots more, but we wanted to keep it very, very simple. And so these are the measures we picked. So we took our key metrics and we said, what measures do we want to use? We picked, demographics, just using the national standards for the basic demographic categories. Social determinants, we're just looking at employment and housing. we say diagnosis for SUD and mental health, but it's really diagnostic category. So that's where primary substance would essentially be the same thing, which substance category. So if we know those things about the person we're serving, the type of services providing, and then the outcome data, we said, what are the measures we want to use? So we picked the Brief Addiction Monitor, or BAM, the PHQ-9 depression screen, the GAD-7 anxiety screen, and the treatment effectiveness assessment. And then we also have the WHO-QoL-BREF, which is the World Health Organization's Quality of Life Index, and the BARC-10, which is the Brief Assessment of Recovery Capital. We picked those because they're in use, they're standardized, there's research on them, and they're free and public domain. So that's why we picked those measures. And then this was the format, is basically we wanted to create a way that no matter how people were collecting data, that it could be shared into a centralized database, the Force de-identified data repository, which accepts data through API, which essentially is just a digital highway from an EMR, a provider database, a mobile app, an online portal. And then our output is reports back to the service providers and research evidence of treatment or service quality. So that's the system that we've created. And we connected with tech partners that serve primarily treatment providers. So these are mostly EMRs. And I realize that recovery homes residences don't use the EMRs. But as you can see in progress, there are lots of other apps and recovery support providers, systems and softwares that are in the process of connecting to Force. These are the folks that are contributing so far. We have 87 signed agreements with treatment centers. Some do offer sober housing, but we don't have any standalone sober homes yet. We've had some inquiries, but those are the ones we have now. So lots of treatment providers participating, and lots of, almost 190,000 patient episodes of care, and lots of surveys. So these were the questions I just came up with, and I know this is just to be a brief report, but just to think about, and I put my contact information at the end. I'm certainly happy to contribute or continue this conversation with anyone. With recovery residences, if the important variables are identified about the person served, the service provided, and the outcomes observed, the same thing could be accomplished. And I know this is happening in some states. I know this is happening with some software companies, but like NATAP, we wanted to do it from the treatment provider's perspective or the service provider perspective, because NATAP does have a lot of recovery support provider members. It's not just treatment centers. These are the ones that are current Force technology partners that I know are in use for recovery residences. I know of Behave Health, they have something called Sober Living app. The Recovery Capital Index is created by a company called Glue, and I know they are working with some recovery residences to look at recovery capital. I believe they have grants because the RCI is there is a cost to it. It's a proprietary instrument, but I believe they do grants to try to get support so recovery homes don't have to pay for it. And One Step Software also has a sober living software. And so that was really all I had. My contact information is there, and I'm going to end the show here. So I wanted to just see if there were, and I see there might be some chats, what other, are you seeing other softwares that are being in use? Are you seeing other formats? Are you seeing other programs? I'd love to know about these, either probably not now because you have a big agenda, but I'd love to know what other initiatives like this you're seeing, and also any other softwares, because part of what we're doing is parsing down what are getting to be popular softwares for data collection among different kinds of service providers, and can we connect with them and pull that data together. So that is my presentation, and I don't know where you want to go with that, Al.
Thank you, Dr. Peters. One quick question, and then I want to ask Susan Ramsey a question related to this. Of the 87, I know that the last time we spoke, you were starting to get non-NATAP members involved in this. How's that going?
Yeah, I'd have to look, but I believe like about a quarter are not NATAP members. So that'd be 20, about 20. So, you know, it's a good number, because it really, if we it's not marketed because we're not really selling anything at this point. But we really only talk about force mostly to NATAP members. You know, we do NATAP webinars, we do talk to our members about force, but that's why we just haven't gotten a lot of non-NATAP members. But we didn't want there to be any barrier to joining. So we know NATAP membership has a cost to it, and we didn't want to require that. And someone who treated or supported people with substance use disorders, we wanted them to be able to join with no barrier. So
Is there some reluctance on the part of providers? And the reason I ask that is you have over 1,000 members in your organization alone, let alone the thousands upon thousands around the country of legitimate, and just let's talk about the hundreds that probably are in South Florida that are legitimate, and without data, we're never going to change some of the core things that we need to change in Washington and in Tallahassee. So is there something that's holding back groups of providers from coming into to this data collection system?
yeah, I would say probably three things come to mind. One is concerns around confidentiality, which is, you know, two is concerns around, will there be a cost? What costs would this be? Three is, and along with that is staffing. You know, what will this require of my staff? Will they have to do different things? And the third one is they just don't know about it. You know, I mean, we're small. We haven't had a peer-reviewed publication yet, though we're, you know, working toward those. We're not with the government. We're not a software company that does marketing. And so you either, you know, find out about force through a product you already use, like a software product, or word of mouth. And then I guess there'd be four is worry about what we'll find. You know, I have had that concern that, you know, will you be publishing our data? You know, of course, the answer is no. What if we find out things we don't like? You know, I've heard that kind of in between the lines, concerns about we don't know what we don't know. But primarily I would say it's people they say, don't make me measure anything else, or don't, you know, we don't have the capacity to do anything else that's going to take time from our patients and our providers. So, which is why Force, you know, can join for free. You can, that's why we tried to remove all the cost barriers. We tried to, we removed the, you know, complexity barrier, and the membership barrier, and it's all fully de-identified data. So we removed the concerns about data confidentiality, or patient confidentiality, and then and we use existing tools that a lot of people are already using. So we don't require that you use a brand new tool. So we tried to remove all those barriers. So yeah, we're hoping we just get bigger and bigger, because that is our goal, is we want to impact policy and change. You know, I mean, it's not, we want to help providers, yes, but ultimately we want more people to get services, and we want to reduce stigma, and we want to demonstrate that different kinds of services really help people. And so more people can get them.
I'm going to hand it over to Susan. My question to you is, I believe FAR already uses one of these programs for data collection. I think it's RCI, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, so there's that. So we already met, hello, Annie and Nikki and Michael Cabot and I think Michael was there. I don't remember. Maybe it was just us gals. Anyway, it is really something that we're trying to continue to incorporate into FAR, but the barrier that you mentioned is like, if you're a small recovery residents and you don't have that many staff, I mean, they're already, if they're in Palm Beach County, they're already doing some of this, the RCI tool, but you know, how do you get people to do this? But you know, I'm with her. If you don't have the data, then you can't move forward. So I mean, it's my hope that we'll be able to do something with them from the FAR perspective, and we'll get as much, continue to get as much data as can possibly be gotten. Because, you know, you all know, I mean, that's how you change laws, that's how you change insurance, that's how you change all that stuff. So, you know, some of the stuff that Jeff's going to be talking about later has to do with that too, right?
Is there some benefit, do you think, in joining forces with NAATP? And again, recovery residences, there's a dearth of data. And of course, the goal is, writ large, the goal is to make it easier for governments to recognize, and then insurance companies to recognize the long-term benefit of recovery housing, good certified recovery housing, and in that way take away some of the negatives right now, and also you know, some of the reasons why, like in Orange County, California, still to this day, there's a corrupt system of recovery residences. So
Right.
so
It is
we
on
don't
FAR's agenda.
have peer review studies. We don't have data. Go ahead, Susan. I'm sorry.
No, I interrupted you. I mean, that is one of the goals of FAR for next year.
Okay.
You know, is to try to continue to get this kind of information. And when Heidi is here, hello, Heidi. So when you get to Heidi's part, like she can talk about that as one of the, so it's great. It's wonderful. And if I could figure out another way to get more people involved, I'm with you.
Well, now, you know, perhaps you guys can go offline and sometime in the next month or so discuss. And, you know, if we can get NAR on board, then you have some national basis to talk about data from recovery residences, and maybe even secure some grants so that your small budget, Dr. Peters, is not consumed with 5,000 recovery residences across the country. Anyway, good. We have Heidi Matheny, who is now back online. Before we get to her, Dr. Atanito had a question for Oxford House. Michael, are you still with us?
Hey,
Okay, good. The question was, well, I'll let her ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, I put it in chat and you answered it. I just was curious what the policy was on medical marijuana use in the Oxford House residences.
The answer was,
it's not permissible.
that
Okay.
conforms with Florida law now after last year's session.
Okay,
Okay.
very simple.
Perfect.
Oh, and I'd love to get in touch with you, Annie, about publication.
Great.
Great, thank you. I will put my email in the chat.
Okay, now that we have Heidi joining us, we do have a couple of minutes before we get to the legislative discussion. Do you want to give us an update for FAR, Heidi? I got to unmute. There you go.
Okay, congratulations to Oxford House for the work that they're doing. And Annie, I look forward to talking with you more about how we can collaborate on collecting data. Shall I share my screen?
Yeah,
You're
yes,
on mute.
please.
Okay. Let's see. All right, everybody see my screen? Yeah, okay. All right, so we're really excited. We went over we crossed over to over 8,500 beds this month, which is really super exciting. We have 1,761 units, 8,559 beds across the state. Level 2 and 3, we have 5,539 beds, and level 4s, we have 3,012 beds. I'm not going to go through line by line all the different counties, but this is how many units as well as the bed count for each county. You'll notice that Broward County, and let me scroll down, in Palm Beach County has the greatest number of beds throughout the state. Go down. These are our statistics from year to year. There's been a substantial increase. You can see from 2017, we started with 3,280 beds. We're up to 8,559, which is pretty remarkable. We have just this year alone, I believe I had mentioned to you previously, Al, just this year alone since January, we've gone up by 10.4%, which, I mean, that's a huge increase, huge increase. And so for Palm Beach County numbers, let's see, we have 95 certified providers in Palm Beach County, 3,449 beds. We have 7 programs for level 1, 30 units and 100 beds. Level 2, we have 60 programs, 312 units and 1,707 beds for level 2. Level 3, 5 programs, 37 units, 124 beds. And level 4, we have 39 programs, 386 units, 1,518 beds. Our overdose numbers that we show from January through August have in recovery housing in our certified recovery homes has been a total of 19. Out of those 19, 14 of them were male, 5 female, and unfortunately we had 7 deaths. The overdose, based on our city police reports, Clearwater, we had 1 overdose. Coral Springs, we had 1. Delray, 4. Fort Lauderdale, 2. Jacksonville, 1. In Fort Lauderdale, we had 1 death. And I'm sorry, Coral Springs, we had 1 death as well. Delray, 1 death out of the 4. Fort Lauderdale, the 2 overdoses, 1 death. Jacksonville, 1 overdose, 1 death. Lake Worth, 2 overdose, no deaths. Pompano Beach, 5 overdose, 3 deaths. Tampa, 1 overdose. In West Palm Beach, we had 2 overdoses with no deaths. We're showing fentanyl, of course, being the #1 offender when it comes to substance use disorder and what people are using. The trends are interesting enough. It seemed like a lot of the incident reports that we received over the past few months, the individuals have been from Florida, which I found to be very interesting. We don't show that on here for whatever reason, but on the incident report on our status chart showed a lot of them from Florida. And as always, commitment is the key to recovery. We are committed to helping people recover. We're committed to maintaining quality standard housing and upholding FAR's recovery services and providing effective strategies to meet the expanding needs of our providers. We are always about commitment to recovery. And our National Alliance for Recovery Residents was formed in 2011. Many of you already know this. Benefits, the mission. And we are, regarding steps to certification, we're really super excited about the streamlining process to the certification for an individual to get certified. We've streamlined it. We're getting applicants through the process in record time. It's really, truly amazing, but we'll talk more about that on the 2024 update. And that is what I have.
Any questions, comments?
I'm sorry, I'm at Friday. I'm working on my docket, and so.
All right. I do have one question, Heidi, regarding Matt. I asked the same question of Oxford House of Michael. Where are we in full acceptance? I'm not talking about, say, Vivitrol. I'm saying the full spectrum of Matt. How are we in have you broken that down Will you be doing that in the future? Because it's germane to one of the statutory proposals that we'll be discussing in terms of acceptance of MAT. So where are we in FAR?
Well, as far as FAR's position goes with that, we are all about training and development. I was going to talk more about that in the 2024 goals. Our goal and our mission from this point forward, but especially now that new information is coming that I believe Jeff Lynn may be talking about, or Susan may be talking about it shortly. We want to expand MAT housing throughout the state, make sure more and more providers have a full knowledge, through education and training on how to do it in a safe and effective manner. But for the next meeting, I'll be happy to break those numbers down for you to see how many providers are fully MAT providers. I'll be glad to do that.
That'd be great. And maybe if you can, you weren't online. We are having a legislative meeting on the 20th of September. That's a Wednesday. It'll be a shorter meeting than our normal meeting. It will just be dealing with proposed legislation. That would be good to have that information by the 20th of September, if possible.
Yes, absolutely. I can get that for you.
Okay. And speaking of the 2024 goals, are you going to deliver them, or is Michael Cabot, or how's that? How's that happening?
Unfortunately, Michael Cabot was not able to make it due to a scheduling conflict, but we have the much better looking Susan Ramsey here stepping in for him.
Except I'm not going to do it. Heidi's going to do it. But and again, Cabot is not anywhere near as good looking as I am. So that's how it's well.
Okay, well, let me get to the trivial. How long do you think it'll take you to present this? Because we do have to dive into the legislative part of the session today. So you think you can get it done in about 15 minutes?
Oh, absolutely. I can, quick and painless, I promise you.
Yeah, because it is germane to what we're talking about, because much of the proposed legislation, it has to do with housing. So go ahead. You want to share your screen?
Yes, I say quick and painless, and then I get
and then you deleted it.
Yeah. All right, bear with me a second while I try to get this going here.
While you're doing that, Heidi, Ariana, just anecdotally, how are you doing in Delray?
Personally, I'm great. Thanks for asking.
Oh, okay, great.
I'm
Okay, Heidi, back to you.
No, I'm just joking. I thought I'd be funny. We're doing okay-ish. Just an FYI, I went early when you guys were talking about the deaths so far for the year. We're at 32, 33, so we're already over the total number for last year in Delray. But as far as the overdose numbers that are not deaths, we're below. Like for an example, last month, normally we've been averaging 20 to 25 a month. Last month we had 10. This month, very similar. When we averaged 20, 25, this month we're at 10 again. I do know that a couple agencies had been coming down to Delray over the last few months and flooding the streets with Narcan. But when I talk to the people who I know on the streets that are using, they're just really talking about meth. They said for like 2 weeks straight, the dealers were just coming with meth. There was not even any fentanyl. But during the same time, when I looked at OD mapping, because I was like very quizzical about why all this stuff was happening, if that's really a word. I looked at the rest of Palm Beach County and there was a ton of overdoses. There was a bunch in Lake Worth Beach. There was a bunch in Boynton Beach, West Palm. But for some reason, there was this lull in Delray. So I don't know what was going on, but I just kept hearing meth, meth, meth.
Right.
So
what you're saying then is there are fewer overdoses, but there's a larger percentage of death in terms of the overdoses that you're saying. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Which likely is fentanyl. All right. Okay. Thank you, Ariana. Heidi,
You're welcome.
Yes. Okay. Let's see if I can do this here. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Nope.
No? Okay. Oh boy. Okay, now can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. All right, so yeah, we're very excited. Our small and mighty team is putting together a lot of really wonderful things for 2024. We have a staff, I don't know if many of you know, we have a staff of 4, and we cover the entire state, and we stay pretty busy with that. So for 2024, our goals, you see, why is this not working here? Okay. So our primary goal, increase our bed capacity by at least 10,000 or more, expand mat bed capacity through training and education. That's an ongoing process that we anticipate doing monthly training videos on the topics about NAR and MAT, RCI, and a few other things. We want to change the time frame in which the provider has to get their new CRRA from 30 days to 90 days without being, without having consequences for that. The trainings that we're going to do on a monthly basis, like I said, MAT, Recovery Capital Index that was mentioned a few times here this morning or this afternoon for data collection, recovery-oriented systems of care, bringing the community, bringing more awareness of that to our community. The NAR Standards 3.0, and we have new software enhancements. We're super excited about that. We are rolling out throughout from this point forward over the next year. We're rolling out little by slowly a new software system that'll hopefully get more data collected, but make the whole entire process for our providers seamless, friendly, user-friendly, and easier to get through. So we have more opportunity and more time to collaborate with them, and help them be the best providers that they can be. Let's see. Benefits of being FAR certified, the network of support. Our providers can ask each other any questions, that they have about how to run a good sober home. There's always that collaboration within the community regarding that. Training and education, access to referrals under the 397-487, access to housing vouchers through a number of organizations, and COSAP funding being one of them. We're training our Palm Beach County providers on that. And this is how you can find certified housing, is on our website through Find Certified Housing right there. And you can reach Josh or myself. Josh is the director of certification. He's on this call as well. This is his number and email address, and anybody can reach out to me as well. Quick and painless. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Any questions or comments? All right. Well, thank you, Heidi. Appreciate it. And we're now going to go to some legislative proposals. The first series of proposals, the first 7, I'm going to ask Jeff to introduce them. Jeff Lynn, can you? Okay, we have to wait for Marianne to get back. Did you bring Anita back? Oh, yeah. Okay. All right, we need to on our end get this on.
Al, in the meantime, I see Dr. Mark Schlosser has his hands raised.
Oh, great. Dr. Schlosser, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to make an anecdotal comment that the increase in fatal overdose is probably due to xylazine and the nitazines. So the xylazine is not reversed with Narcan, and I'm seeing it in more and more patients. And the nitazines are a new novel psychoactive substance that is an analog of fentanyl, but 25 times stronger. So I think the polysubstance use and the illicit supply is clearly becoming much more deadly.
According to the medical examiner so far this year, it's statistically pretty much the same. Last year we had 20 OD deaths caused by xylazine. This year so far, in 16, or a couple behind, but it's still significant. You know, it's hard to say. The one that's, you know, those new fentanyl analogs have not really shown increases this year. As a matter of fact, let me take a look, except for no, actually it was a decrease in fluorofentanyl, and a decrease in NPE. So yeah, I mean, we're still, xylazine is still toxic and deadly. So yeah, you are correct. Okay, thank you, Dr. Schlosser. We're now going to talk about issue number 1. There are 7 issues on this particular grouping. And I'd ask Jeff Lynn to introduce the issue, and then we can discuss what, if anything, we should be doing about it.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
Thanks. You can't hear me at all?
Now we can hear you. No.
You can hear me better? All right, yeah, my computer microphone is all my AirPod microphones, and lately I might have to go replace them after 100 years. Okay, thanks everyone. The legislative session, as you may not know, is earlier this coming year in 2024 because of the presidential election. And whenever there is a presidential election, during the legislature meets every spring, but when there's an election because of primaries, they move all that back. And when they move that back, all of the elected officials in the state who are state representatives or senators need to submit their proposed legislation by a deadline, else it's not even going to be heard for that session. So we've had to generate some legislation earlier than we otherwise would be used to. And the reason why we're kind of pushing through this earlier and with a lot of information. So I appreciate your patience. Obviously, if there's any questions, the way my screen is set up, by the way, I can't see if anyone's raising a hand. So Al, if you could help me with that. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going until you interrupt me.
If you just take your copy of your issue sheet, the 7 issues.
Yep.
That's what we have up on the screen.
Yeah, no, I got it. So when we talk about issues, I don't want to say they're issues like there are problems. They're just over the period of years, we've had bigger things we needed to address with the task force. And these are some lingering issues that have been pervading and impacting the sober living community with regard to foreign regulation and as things play out. So we have identified seven issues. There's actually 6 to 1 split, but 7 different issues that we want to talk about that have come up over the years that, again, have been impeding sober living as well as arguably are discriminatory. So the first one has to do with taxation. And in Florida, the Florida legislature has authorized units of local governments, mostly counties, but some cities, to assess various taxes besides just sales tax. And one of those taxes is generally called the bed tax or the tourism tax. And if you've ever stayed in a hotel in Florida, if the county has it, you'll see on your bill, one of the many taxes that's on there will say a bed tax or tourism tax, whatever it is. Those are applied to hotels, motels, Airbnbs, vacation rentals, anything that brings in transient tourist use, because that money then is turned around to help the local government with its tourism advertising. So if you ever see any advertising on TV, come to Fort Lauderdale, whatever, they've spent that money very likely from this tax that helped them do it. What's been happening over, this going back to at least 2012, if not earlier, certainly in Palm Beach County, but other counties, the tax collector has decided that sober living is transient and therefore it is subject to the bed tax or the the transient tax. They call it different things, as well as sales tax on leases, because you are required to collect sales tax when you rent out residential property. And so because these impair and make it difficult to provide sober living as an unnecessary tax that's not placed on any other families, our first recommendation is to revise the tax code, which is in chapter 212, generally to simply state, for purposes of this chapter, recovery residences certified, again, certified recovery residences, we're not talking all, certified recovery residences that rent properties for these purposes are not subject to any taxes imposed on transient accommodations, including sales tax, locally imposed discretionary surtaxes, convention taxes, tourist development taxes, or any tourist impact taxes. Those are the main ones that get hit on transient uses. It may not be all of them. This is actually, because we're dealing with taxation, this is probably one section of code or proposal we're really going to probably lean on the legislative drafters in Tallahassee more to get it right. But the concept is there, that counties should not be taxing sober living as a transient Airbnb use. So that's issue number one. Al, you're muted.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Niles, this is something you're going to need to bring back to Mayor Weiss, since this affects the county. We're going to have our meeting on the 20th. If we can get some kind of feedback, whether the county's okay with this, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm taking notes.
Great.
And I remember, Niels, in 2012, Ann Gannon, I believe she's still the tax collector, right? There was some, I don't want to say Department of Revenue, it may have been some kind of an opinion that came out that no one has seen, that opined that no, those aren't transient uses, but no one's seen it. We've just heard of it, and next thing you know, Ms. Gannon stopped pressing the issue. So there may have already been a determination made by Department of Revenue on that, but none of us have ever seen it.
Okay, thanks.
Al and Jeff, is the fair housing silent on this issue?
About taxation?
Yeah.
It's not silent. It doesn't explicitly address "you shall not tax." It's we're not taxing any other similar use that exists out there. So why? And therefore, you have inconsistent application. I get calls all the time. Referrals. Hey, so and so county gave me a notice of violation. I haven't paid the bed tax for 5 years.
If I can chime in, like the fire marshal issue that we dealt with, I think last year, the year before, rather.
In 21.
Yeah, it can be illegal under the Fair Housing Act and the ADA, but who's going to sue on that issue? So what happens is you have inconsistent application from county to county and from city to city. So a lot of the legislation we'll be talking about is to try to shore up some of the inconsistencies and have some kind of standards that is in state law as opposed to just federal. Is that any other?
Fair enough.
Lots of questions, Terrell.
And make sure that this would not preclude a local government from having or imposing a local business tax receipt. My city does not do that, but I know several that do.
So
again, the language is drafted specifically calls out those sections regarding those tourist tax. So a business tax receipt is simply the tax you pay for the privilege of doing business in a jurisdiction. So that's not contemplated by this.
Maybe we
or intended to be captured. And if anything, the BTR process, Terrell, is something towards the end we should talk about, because what's happening generally with Dan Lauber's ordinances and all these ordinances, these inconsistent ordinances all over the place, that you have some areas don't have a business tax receipt process. So there's really no clear point of entry for some established sober living residences to even know that they need to go to the county or city to apply, and then are getting notices of violations. You're in a legal sober home. Like, what are you talking about? They've had if it's a city, like if the city only is allowed to have up to 3 unrelated people and doesn't have a Dan Lauber ordinance, for instance, and never sought a reasonable accommodation and never just been providing housing, under Dan's new ordinances, all of those uses have to register with the city or the county. I'm not going to get into the legality of that, but the recommendation under the Chapter 419 amendments was language is in there, and you saw it, through the business tax receipt process or such other process that is implemented by a local government. So this doesn't touch business tax receipts, but at the same time, we got to find a way that it may be through the business tax process. I'm not going to force a city to tax my clients or tax people in recovery or whatever, but there does need to be some mechanism, something that people in the community that are providing sober living are aware these laws exist and register themselves so that they can get on the map and not be prosecuted later.
Well, maybe we should have a disclaimer for the normal and ordinary business fees that are charged to all other businesses. I mean, I get what you're saying, because we're specific. That means that that it does not affect an ordinary business tax, but again, so that everybody's aware, we ought to consider that, and we'll be considering that over the course of the next 3 weeks.
So I just want to jump in. It's really important for everyone to know that Jeff has really been working with FAR, and a lot of these are the issues that are coming up from FAR certified homes, like just different things. So Jeff has been doing a great job with respect to that. So that, just to give it some context, because also moving to issue 2, that's the case, is that a lot of the issues are being heard through FAR, and Jeff's been helping, that's all.
Okay, well, thank you for mentioning that, Susan. And I think what Terrell brings up, because what we do, in my opinion, we are doing with the League of Cities and the Association of Counties, and not against them or alone. And so, this is kind of a preemption of an issue that might be brought up later on. And it's not the purpose of this legislative change to do away with the ordinary. This is for transient use. This is like, it's not a hotel. It's not a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb. Okay. But you're a business, so business taxes should be excluded from this, exception or exemption. So we'll look at this at Task Force Central and see if we can come up with some language. Anyway, let's move on to issue number 2.
If I could just really quickly, I just wanted to say, I do think the language is clear. I don't have a problem with the language. I just wanted to bring it to your attention because that is something that you're right, Al, that the Florida League of Cities or Florida Association of Counties will probably ask about. And so maybe some kind of disclaimer or something to say it is not applicable to business tax receipts might be helpful somewhere, even if it's in, legislative whereas clauses or what have you.
Yeah, no use to pick a fight when none is needed. Okay, we're moving on to turn your page to issue number 2. Starting with, well, actually, this page deals with the CRRA workforce shortage. Before I hand it over to Jeff, we pretty much agreed last year to include this in our task force bill, but it was not accepted by the legislators in large part because it was in the 11th hour and they didn't want to change the bill. I have one change that I'm going to recommend toward the end of this, but I'll give it to Jeff to just explain what the purpose of this. And Neil, you're involved in this as well because of the workforce. This is because of the workforce issues with CRRAs. So go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you. This is really quick. Okay, so the second issue that we've been experiencing for quite a while, apparently, and of course, if there's anyone from FAR that wants to chime in, please do so, is the shortage of CRRAs. So let me back up a second. When the statute was created to identify a credentialing agency for sober living in 397.487, one of the sponsors of the bill, the late Representative Bill Hager, insisted that there be this manager type of position, the CRRA, that, by the way, my experience, unless I'm wrong, NAR knows nothing about, FAR knows nothing about. This is not standard nationally anywhere else but Florida. And what it's ended up happening, I mean, the concept was, we want a house manager or someone who knows what they're doing. Just because you have a sober living residence doesn't mean you know what you're doing to create a peer-supported therapeutic environment that's drug and alcohol free, and that's, is therapeutically ameliorative of their disability. So conceptually, that's where the CRRA, the Certified Recovery Residence Administrator, came in. However, that law, the law that we're talking about, generally provides that if you don't have a CRRA, you can't be operating. And if your CRRA leaves, you can't be operating. And if you fire your CRRA and you don't let anyone know, you're getting revoked. So it's pretty harsh, very harsh. In I think in the eyes of most sober living providers. And in that instance, many smaller providers themselves have become CRRAs so they can, there's not a marketplace, there's not a LinkedIn board or an Indeed board of CRRAs looking for jobs, so to speak. It's kind of like word of mouth. So the problem that we've been experiencing is there's just not enough of them. And if you want to provide more housing and you don't have one. What has happened in the past, and I don't remember when we made the original change, but to fix this initially, and this may have been the year before, to fix this initially, we had recommended that a CRRA initially is limited to 50 oversight and responsibility for 50 residents. Before, the initial statute was 3 dwellings. That changed to 50 residents to be more in tune with how it actually works. And we all agreed as a task force and the legislators adopted an expansion of that up to 100 residents if the credentialing agency FAR approved it based upon certain standards being met. So what the additional revision is asking for is we're like, thank you, but that's not really working. So the first change proposed, and there's 2 sections, 397487 is the top statute there. And the revision there is, first you'll see initially a recovery residence had 30 days to replace the CRA, and that has just proven to be functionally impossible. So the proposal is 90 days to give someone up to 90 days to find someone, because you don't want to just find someone and then decide you don't like them or they're not working, or they have a conflict or whatever. So it takes about 90 days ballpark to find a new one. And then the sentence continues. So if you were approved to have more than 50 residents, 100 residents, and you had that qualifying CRRA, let's assume that I was the qualifying CRRA and FAR approved me to oversee 100 residents. And then I either leave or I'm terminated, resigned, whatever. The second part of this sentence here says, and by the way, if you had those 100 residents per CRRA and that CRRA leaves, you have 90 days to find a new CRRA, and you don't all of a sudden, it doesn't affect what you have going on or not. It's meant to maintain the status quo. So if I had a CRA overseeing 100 residents and that person leaves, I can still have 100 residents total under one CRA, but I have 90 days to find a replacement CRA, and that person has to be approved by FAR. So that's what the revisions to section 397487-8B are attempting to do. So before I move on to the second one, I wanted to make sure that everyone digests that.
Any questions or comments?
I have a comment. And again, this is really, and I think Michael Schlossman, who's a FAR board member, is here as well. But a lot of this that Jeff has been drafting has been really a collaboration with FAR, to the extent that, this is how the information comes in, and that's part of our 2024's vision, is to keep moving this along. So I really appreciate Jeff's help with this.
Thanks, Susan. That's kind of you to say. Yeah, we scrambled really quick to try to put information and get it to the FAR board members to review it and comment on it. But candidly, and to Susan's point, I'll just say, people have reviewed it, but this is the first time that we're all really sitting here and pulling it apart. So please, if anyone has a comment, please say so. Don't assume this is just a fait accompli and we're doing this. We want to hear your input to make sure we're not missing anything. We're doing it correctly.
Well,
okay. So the second part of this
hang on a second before you get to the second part.
Yeah.
I do want to say again, I mentioned this earlier, these are proposals for discussion. There's nothing, written in sand. Now, my comment on this first part, now that I'm looking at it, and I think I did this last year, the underlined portion, unless somebody can explain to me how it is not, is redundant. Because all we're saying in 8B, okay, is that the recovery residence has 90 days to retain a certified recovery residence administrator. It does not matter why the administrator is gone. Termination, resignation, ill health, whatever the reason, there's 90 days to replace. I'm a big proponent of less is more. And if you don't need to explain it any further than that 90-day from the 30-day, I would be, I would be taking this out. And I believe I did that last year when I pitched this to Senator Harrell and Representative Caruso.
I don't think, Al, that's a problem. I think just the concern was that, outside of some recognition that you can keep that's, you know, that you as a provider, housing provider, can continue to oversee 100 residents,
Got
up to 100 residents with that approved CRA, that if that CRA goes away, that you don't automatically default back to 50.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, so there is a reason for that language. Okay, let's move down to number 2.
One quick question. Can I, if I lose a CRA, I got 90 days, and then within 20 days, I find a new CRA, and then that guy or gal leaves within 15 days. How long can I perpetually rotate the 90 days in perpetuity?
I would, it seems like the language would say yes.
That's what it seems
that
like.
sounds like an unlikely scenario that there would be that kind of turnover, unless you had a completely intolerable.
Have you met the
boss.
field?
Well, hey, Jeff, didn't we talk about this very point?
Yeah. Yeah, we did.
Okay, what is your take?
I mean, it's one of those things where it ultimately we're trying to protect the residents, to make sure.
No, yet, but that's an issue for me until I hear about it. So I just thinking about it, I'm like, just bringing it up. That's all.
I mean,
Okay.
Neil, I think you're right. That's the point of doing this, is that maybe we can
Correct.
add a little language that sort of says you can't have 90 days until, you know, my hair turns brown again, right?
And that's
Right.
my thing is, Jeff gave us a summary of the, the CRA, and it was for accountability. That's what Senator Harrell, at the time Representative Harrell, wanted, was accountability, and have an individual there. And at the time, to be clear, she wanted me to do the FAR part of it as well, which I didn't want anyway. So in moving forward, we keep clipping the teeth, if you will. We keep taking the CRA to the dentist, taking their teeth. There's nothing. There's got to be no need for a CRA, and as Jeff's point earlier, he doesn't see there's a need for one anyway. But it's in the law. So however we propose to move past it, I get concerned that there'll be these things that happen, and they do happen all the time. They do happen all the time. In my opinion, I've been around 33 years in certification and legislation with substance abuse. And a lot of the things that we think may get abused, in fact, do.
Yeah, that's a good point, Neil. And
It is.
perhaps FAR, Susan, you can take this back to FAR, and there's got to be a good faith effort to replace the CRRA. So
Yeah.
instead of gaming the system, there has to be some flexibility for FAR to hold up his hand and say, whoa, this is not good faith. Your 90 days is contiguous and not broken up by you just having a round robin of CRAs come in, collect a check, and then leave. So
Right.
you guys
Right.
look into
Yeah.
this.
I think that makes a lot of sense, Al, and
I would.
yeah, it makes a
Sorry,
lot
go
of
ahead.
sense, because what the scenario could be that we talked about, you could hire one, fire them, then wait 90 days, hire one, fire one. I mean, like, you could do that, right? But the more important, but the other problem is that this is also a reaction to there not being enough of them.
Yeah.
Right?
Thank you.
So
Yeah.
that's the other problem. So in terms
Yeah.
of certification and getting folks to be, CRRAs, we also need to figure out a way to do that, because if there aren't enough of them, then as a practical matter, you won't be able to do it. So it's a kind of, so that's the other thing in terms of what FAR is trying to do, is to get more people interested in getting this certification.
Here's something to think about as we go forward with this issue, because, Susan, many of us on the task force have seen it all. And when somebody can take advantage, it has been historically that there will be a large minority that will take advantage. How about looking at an alternative to CRRA? You can have your CRRA. They can do up to 100 persons if they get approved by FAR, 50 to 100. But maybe we should write into the law a requirement of an employee, whether you call him a house manager or her a house manager, or somebody who is responsible on a ratio of say 1 to 10, if there's no CRRA, so that there's some, accountability that Harold and Hager were looking for.
They're gonna look for it.
So there's something to think about, and we can I want to keep going. We'll flesh this out on the 20th.
You got it.
Can I ask you a quick question, Al?
Yes, sure.
When we say like keeping, making people accountable, I think one thing that is happening, we go back to all the things that we've dealt with over time, clinical directors, medical directors, et cetera, et cetera. It's happening with recovery residence administrators as well, where places are taking the person that is most intelligent in charge of certain things, who can pass the test and take the courses, and calling them the recovery residence administrator, but they are not actually involved in the actual recovery residence. So if we're going to talk about sort of how to, they can't be in charge of a certain amount, I think the bigger issue is, what are they actually in charge of, and is that something they are doing? And that's just something, it can be harmful to clients when the people that actually are running the recovery residence are not really people who understand the roles, and don't have the ability to have that kind of responsibility.
That's something that I think FAR should look into in terms of guidance as to because not using a certified recovery residence administrator for the job itself and having them do marketing. I mean, I would think that would be a violation of the certification. So maybe you guys need to just look into that, just saying, okay, this is what you do, and the owner, of the certification needs to make sure that happens.
Understood. And Rachel is completely on point. So part of the issue is also that, at what level, what is a CRA, what's going on in the individual sober facility. So the concern about who's watching the shop is without a doubt what we have been talking a lot about, how to, evolve it. Heidi's going to jump in here.
Heidi,
Yeah.
you're up.
Okay, yeah, one thing I just wanted to mention was that ideally, one of the things I'd like to see FAR to be able to do is put together training programs for these owner operators, providers, and house managers, that we could make it a requirement that they go through, so we know that they have some technical skills in order to do this, to have the oversight necessary to provide the best outcome for the individual recovering.
Well, you're talking about house managers, or the CRRAs already go through a rigorous certification process.
Yeah, but I mean, there's been so many issues with the CRRA. If we could develop a training program, because it would make sense. We know about recovery housing, right? So if we could develop a training program to put individuals through, to give them the qualifications necessary in order to operate a sober house, is what I'm thinking.
So you're saying FAR specific, because people do have many of us who are providers for, Neil, for the entity actually do these kinds of training. So you're saying just FAR doing one different, which then takes away training facilities, or would they also have to be credentialed by the board?
I'm really not sure. I'm just brainstorming out loud, to be honest with you. Of some ideas to how we can make this work and make it work better.
They have to be credentialed by law through FCB. I think what Heidi's talking about is additional training.
Yes.
Through FAR, that would just be, boots on the ground. This is what FAR expects from you as a CRRA, and that's something that would be in addition to the Florida Certification Board certification. And
Right. That would also be policies and procedures. Look who's here. Dr. Simeonidis is here.
Dr. Simeonidis, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you much. Yeah, just out of curiosity, who monitors and ensure that the CRRA is doing their duties and fulfilling them in good faith?
Well, Go ahead,
This
go ahead,
is probably
Susan.
a FAR duty.
Well, it's kind of it's a combo.
Yeah.
You know, we do ethics investigations on our entire certified population. And so we would do an ethics investigation on a CRRA complaint. We just have to get the complaint filed by an individual, brought up to Tallahassee, and we have investigators on staff that would then start the process of investigating the accusation.
Neil, can you accept a complaint from FAR? Or does it have to?
Sure, absolutely. We accept a complaint, you know, from any, as long as it's not anonymous. Because a lot of anonymous complaints, you know, over the years are employers trying to get rid of somebody, and they just bring something out, but it can't be anonymous. Other than that, we'll accept a complaint from anybody.
Okay.
So is it the house or it's the CRA responsible for things to run the way they're supposed to in a house?
It would be, in my opinion, it would be the CRRA's responsibility, certain aspects of it, just as it would be in a treatment center, an addiction counselor's responsibility to deliver the services in an ethical manner and conduct themselves in an ethical fashion, where there are other aspects of it that the provider or the organization that owns the bricks and mortar has responsibilities for.
Right, so doctor, there would be FAR with respect to the owner and operator. So if there's a complaint about the CRA, the resident or the complainant would go to FAR, and maybe FAR would refer it to the certification board, or either way. So from your perspective, if you had a complaint with a particular CRA, you'd contact, you know, FAR. You can contact me, but you would contact FAR, and they would go from there.
You can also contact us directly, the
Right.
certification board. You can go on our website, you can click on the ethical violation forms, you can download them, fill them out yourself, and send them in.
And the same is true for FAR.
Thank you.
So we have a double layer of protection there. Okay, let's move on to 397-4871 8B. This is a work in progress, but go ahead, Jeff, just briefly set it up.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And this is just so everyone knows, all of these statutes you're seeing are in numerical order. So the actual issues are, there's an issue that's going to explain this better in a couple of minutes when we get to it. It's going to, they kind of dovetail together. So, you know, don't read this in a vacuum. This is part of a larger idea. Still going back to the CRRA issue. So now what FAR's been starting to work on this year, and others, and we're talking about it, is what is level 4 housing under FAR. So if you give me literally 30 seconds, let me just lay the groundwork here. In short, what we've learned and discovered over the years is that the NAR standard, as we know, has 4 levels of housing. So FAR has 4 levels of housing. At the NAR level, there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. But after talking with Dave Sheridan, who's the president, and Beth Sanders and others at NAR, it became very clear to us that levels 1, 2, and 3 are different completely than 4. It's still a recovery residence. It seems the same, but you have a very unique population in 4. And the people in 4 are going to treatment, and the housing is their housing while they are in treatment. It is for people, the terminology we're most used to hearing from DCF world is the day or night treatment with community housing license. That community housing element, that housing that you are mandated to provide, or that you do provide and mandate your residents live there, that under FAR standards, not NAR standards, but under FAR standards is a level 4. NAR level 4 is basically inpatient treatment in the house. Okay, so we don't have that in Florida, obviously. So the NAR level 4 doesn't translate very cleanly over to what we have in Florida. And Florida and FAR have massaged it to make it more local custom, and to respect and acknowledge that the Florida model is not only here to stay, but actually insurance companies are starting to expect to some degree that's the outpatient paradigm you're providing. So what this starts to do, and there's more conversation about what we call level 4 housing that permeates all of this legislation, because it's important we start talking about it, is, okay, what do you do now when you have a treatment program? And that treatment program by requirement has behavioral health technicians, has clinicians, has all this kind of staff that is working with the client slash patient and the resident. Because it's not like, oh, you're in my treatment program, but now you're a resident. They're inextricably intertwined with each other. So in those instances where, for all intents and purposes, you're in a partial hospitalization-esque kind of Florida model basis, it's harder. You have more of a population, and therefore you need more CRRAs, and you need CRAs that would want to work specifically with this population, which are people in treatment. They're that much closer to their recent relapse, or that much closer to maybe being in a detox situation or inpatient treatment. It's a different population completely under NAR and FAR, and FAR is still trying to define for its purposes what the parameters of that will be. So what this section is proposing to do, piggybacking on what was just above it, was if you're a FAR level, certified FAR level 4 home, and you have all of this staff, which is at no less than a 1-to-8 ratio, that you can actually have, instead of 100, you can have a total of 250 residents under your care, because you have this entire staff that is accountable. There are BHTs and others. And so instead of just having a sober living residence with one CRA, you have an entire recovery community caring for these residents. And the ability to provide those outpatient services and needing vast number of unavailable CRAs is impinging on the treatment industry to provide these services. So this proposal simply says, if you're a certified recovery resident, you're a certified provider, and you are, and we added some language after this to make it very clear that this is a level 4 residence. We'll talk about that later. Only level 4, and you have a certain staffing ratio, and FAR has approved your CRA, then in those limited circumstances, you don't need another CRA for, 250 patients is a lot, but really isn't a lot for these larger treatment programs, outpatient programs. So that's this proposal, is to say, if you're a level 4 program, which is any treatment program that requires its residents to live in its housing, whether it's day night with community housing, day night, IOP, OP, if you're requiring your residents to live in your housing as part of their treatment program, and we're going to get to that in a couple of minutes, that's a level 4 house. And now those that are level 4 houses and have a 1-to-8 staffing ratio through their treatment program, we're giving them, we're making it easier on them, because why do they need to hire so many CRAs when they already have the equivalent staffing? They have at least one, and they usually have more than one. But it's not to eliminate the CRA, it's to meet the intent of the CRRA statute, while not impinging upon the ability of treatment providers to provide housing, necessary housing, while their patients are in treatment. That's the intent of this section.
Before we open it up, I do want to give you some history from last year. The legislators were very uncomfortable with this section until I explained to them, incorrectly I have subsequently found out, but I explained to them that these residents are going to have personnel, boots on the ground in the residences themselves, because I thought the 1-to-8 referred to 1-to-8 in the residence, but the 1-to-8 refers to the entire program. So I have some language that I'm going to bring up, and I think this fixes it, because I don't think anybody's going to be comfortable in Tallahassee when you have a 1-to-8 ratio in the treatment building, when you have a recovery residence out in the community, be it a level 4, wholly owned and controlled by a licensed service provider, but there's nobody in that residence that it has any 24/7 authority. They got to call out if something happens. So, in the real world, you may have a house manager for every 10. But here's what I would want to put in here to make it clear, and I think this would be helpful to the legislators to be able to say 250 is a lot, but I'm willing to overlook that because there's some boots on the ground 24/7 employees that are going to be overseeing the houses or the residences. So this sentence would read, and I'm going to go down 4, let's see. When it starts with 100 residents under this section, and is wholly owned or controlled by a licensed service provider. Again, we may want to reference level 4 so we know what we're talking about here. May actively manage up to 250 residents so long as the licensed service provider maintains a service provider personnel to patient ratio of 1:8 and maintains 24/7 on-site supervision at the residence with a house manager or with personnel to resident ratio of say 1:10, 1:12, whatever we think is reasonable in the real world. And that way we're explicitly saying, okay, if you want to have a CRRA that's over 250 patients who are also residents, then you have to have some supervision personnel that are dedicated to the residences 24/7 that live there. Tori, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, I was unmuting it. Thanks, Al. One of the only things that I want to remind people when we're talking about this section, and thank you for your contribution, not all of your residents, when you're in an active level 4 integrated situation, will be on property at any time. And the reason for that is clinical services being performed per different hours at the clinical building. So your staff will be in transportation. Your staff will be in transportation to other areas or things of that nature. And so to have a 24-hour staff means 2 different things to 2 different people. If you're from an outside observer looking in, you're saying, we want 24-hour, 7-day-a-week supervision. If you're running an ethical and legitimate level 4 program in accordance with how you should be doing it, then you have 24-hour, 7-day-a-week supervision to include cameras being installed in your properties. Not, of course, in the bedroom or bathroom. But those staff are also accompanying your clients when needed, especially if you're in charge of their transportation to make sure they're arriving to their destination. So I think we might need to just take that into understanding when you say 24-hour on-site. If there's nobody on site, it's not necessarily because someone called out. It's because those staff members are accompanying those individuals with the supervision with where those individuals are going. So I do want to just have that in mind as we add a sentence or alter something, to remember that 24-hour supervision isn't having someone sitting somewhere where clients aren't.
Okay. Again, I refer back to the legislators who are uncomfortable with this when they look at the number 250. I see that there's a loophole anyway, even if it's 100 residents, because there's no, they are tightly controlled in a level 4. They meaning the patients. So they're chaperoned to and from. They go to treatment, whatever activities or whatever clinical stuff goes on. But between the hours of, I'll just spitball 9 p.m. and 8 a.m., there's nobody. If there's nobody there, there's a concern. And if a CRRA has 50 residents, there's more of that active. And I'll ask Neil to maybe chime in if the training of the CRRA is about that. What do we do in the hours when somebody may hang themselves or somebody may use drugs and be found the next morning?
I just wanted to follow up, and then Neil, so you're right. And when they're on residential site, you're having 24-hour supervision. But I would tell you that you would never be able to have enough CRRAs for coverage. In any level 4 scenario, your BHTs are your on-site lead. Your CRRAs are supervising. You'd have to hire 40 CRRAs to equal the BHTs you're hiring. So a CRA position was never intended, at least in the way that the course is designed, to create an active worker. The CRA is an observer and an administrator observing staff that are supposed to be provided underneath it, at least in a level 4 scenario. Now, in a level 1, 2, and 3 scenario, the CRA is provided a lot more deference
Did
and may
the BHTs live in the houses?
nobody can live in a house that is actively monitored. You are observing on 8-hour shifts. So no one may legally live in a residence that is being utilized for services accompanying to a DCF license and an insurance scenario as well with joint commission.
Okay.
And both level 4 are going to also have joint commissions such as ourselves. So you have 8-hour active shifts. So you're covering 24 hours in 8-hour blocks, the same way that you would within any other environment that goes 24 hours. So when someone might return from a PHP at night, for instance, either at 9 p.m. or 10 p.m., depending on your hours, until the morning, you are, of course, going to have, and you should have, without being told, which is where FAR comes in. You should have 24-hour, 7-day-week supervision each of those shifts.
Right. Let me ask Josh for his input. Tori, thank you. You know, and I get what you're saying, that if somebody's doing it right, there's no issue here. We're concerned with those that are skating by or are not doing it the way they should be doing it ethically. But Josh, I really want to hear the FAR perspective from you. And then Neil, if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Al. So when a provider is getting certified, like our level of support for level 4 is 24-hour support. You know, so one of the documents that I require in a policy procedure resident handbook is a staffing sample. And if it's not saying 24-hour, if I don't see anybody there from the hours of 11 to 7 in the morning, then I'm going to kick that back to them. And I'm going to have a conversation with them that you have to have 24-hour, you have to have an overnight staff, and not just somebody called a house manager that may have another job, but it's a paid awake staff that should be making rounds, you know, periodically every 30 minutes, checking on these residents to make sure that nothing's going wrong. So, but that is a component of the compliance that we require for FAR certification.
Okay, so FAR requires it. If FAR requires it, then there's really no reason to have it in statute. If it's part of your policy and procedure.
It's part of the policy and procedure, unless you want to make it very clear in that, like in the legislation, for various reasons to point to that. But that is a component that we look at currently.
Well, I mean, we can even put in the certifying entity shall require that that there's on-site supervision for 24/7, something like that. And we could do it that way instead of getting a ratio together or doing any of that stuff. But we'll, you know, hey, fortunately we have another 3 weeks to hammer all this out. And so please put that in your list to do, and let's figure out how, when I go to Gail Harrell and when I go to Mike Caruso, that I can explain to them that these people are more monitored than people in level 1, 2, and 3, even though those people may have a house, a house manager. And that will go a long way for them to be able to be comfortable. Okay, I see, Tori, you still have your hand up. Are you good? Oh, just the technology
thing. Do I have to take that off? Do I have to?
Yeah, you just say hand up, hand down.
Okay.
Same way.
All right. Well, yeah, that was not an intentional hand up forever. I just didn't see that.
Done that. Okay. Seeing no other hands, let's go to issue 3. Yep. This is discrimination in housing. This is, I'm going to, again, just give a preemption before I give Jeff the mic. This is why I was raising the MAT issue with FAR and with Oxford House. My fear, and if FAR thinks this is unfounded, you know, then I'm the first guy to say best practices in statute is you can never do that too much. But my fear is that you're going to get, especially level 1 and 2 and maybe 3 houses that say, you know what, I'm just not going to refer, I'm not going to accept referrals, and I'm leaving FAR. Because I don't believe in MAT. I'm abstinent base only. My house is abstinent base. I'm not going to introduce a partial agonist that has opioids in it. Just not going to happen. Even buprenorphine, the medical examiner says there's a certain number of people, not that many, but there's a certain number of people where the primary cause of death is buprenorphine. I mean, that's somebody who's going to take a whole bottle of sleeping pills. You know what I mean? That's not accidental. That is a suicide. But my fear is when you're looking for 10,000 beds, that we pass a law like that that's going to not educate, but require MAT, we may lose beds. So that's my intro. Jeff, you want to give a quick overview?
Yeah, just a quick one.
Why
and
we
then
want this in
and
the
let
first
me,
place? Okay.
yes.
Hey,
and
Jeff,
first
do you
before I
mind
that,
if I
want-
do this? Do you mind if I do this?
No, no, absolutely. No, let me
Okay.
give me 10 seconds really quick. I just want everyone to know, because they weren't aware, that some of you may not know, most of you do. Whitney Lehman is no longer the certification director at FAR, and Steve Farnsworth has moved on as well. And there's a whole new group of amazing, dedicated people. I will say that openly. I will scream at the top of my lungs on the FAR board now, and the employees and Heidi and Josh are underpaid and overworked, but care. And so everything that you're seeing we're talking about has been really vetted by some highly intelligent people. And I'm not saying that, oh, you should do it because they said it. I just want everyone on the conference to know that these things have been somewhat vetted. So we're not just making it up, is what I'm trying to say. So Susan, you want to take this one?
I do. So, I mean, Jeff will tell you that federal law, it's pretty clear that the recovery residence operators really can't say to somebody, no, we won't take you here because you're on medication that was prescribed by your doctor. On top of this is federally recognized and approved treatment for certain of the disorders, right? So there's federal laws clear. What we're hoping to do, FAR's plan, is to continue to educate everyone, right? And that's part of FAR's responsibility with respect to the Palm Beach County grant that we have, is to do MAT trainings in Palm Beach County, and that's been going. But this is the next thing. Now, everyone knows that there's really only 4 employees per FAR. So if this got passed, what would FAR do? FAR is going to have to educate the folks as they come in for renewal or they apply for the new time. So it's going to take time for this to really be practical. But I mean, this is where it is. I mean, Dr. I'm on the Florida Society of Addiction Medicine Policy Group Committee, and we've talked about this too. Like, this is the standard of care. So like, we got to get with it. And this is how it's doing. So Jeff and the board, and it's true, Michael's not here. I think Mr. Schlossman's still here, but like, there's a big change and this is part of it. So I'm not as concerned in the long term that, people are just going to say, the heck with FAR, right? I think that it's the way it's presented and the message. So that's why, as much support as every single person on this task force can also give to the recovery residents out there, I think this is, this is the way it's going.
Okay. Dr. Schlosser, Mark.
Yes, this includes methadone.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, why not? Of course.
Okay, because currently methadone is really excluded in really all, sober homes. The only place that I've been able to work with is DAF on a limited basis and Wayside.
So
but none of the other homes will.
What does that mean that methadone's been precluded? Mean that providers said we're not taking it on methadone, or is there a law that says that?
That's what he said.
No, providers won't allow anyone to be on methadone.
Dr. Schlosser, you're making this, not to interrupt. I think I'm so glad to hear you say that loudly that providers won't take. This is the other problem that we're having, is that we're going through a level 4 housing program, 3, everything's great. The person's doing wonderful. We now need to step them down. The vast majority then of level 2, let me take it back. I don't want to say vast majority. Enough where it got FAR's attention, are saying, we don't take MAT. So then what do? You have a patient that's done wonderfully, that's on doctor prescribed MAT to help them through with their treatment, and a recovery resident says, we're not taking you. The problem with that is it violates the ADA and Fair Housing Act. And so one of the things the FAR board talked about was, hey, FAR is a quasi-governmental delegated agency. We're not really sure what FAR is under state statute, but it's been delegated governmental authority. And as that governmental authority, they can't just waive the Fair Housing Act and ADA, say, hey, it's not our problem. It's the law. It has to be done. Now, I don't want to put him on the spot, but Michael Schlossman might still be on the video meeting. And we talked about this, and now we talked about this actually from a reasonable accommodation standpoint, saying, hey, if my program is abstinence-based, and it's been that way forever, and that's what works, you can't make me bring in someone on MAT. And I was wrong, not legally, but theoretically, because Michael Cabot, Michael Schlossman, Susan, everyone on the board was talking that abstinence-based is not a scientifically recognized treatment modality. It worked for decades for alcoholism. It worked for decades under the big book in AA. It's not really working out for us with everything else, right? And certainly, we're talking mostly, opioid antagonists and not so much alcoholism. So FAR made the decision after a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations that certainly in 397, treatment providers can't deny people on medications. And so when those people are in a recovery residence, which is part of their healthcare, even at a level 2, the FAR board thought, they're going to err on the side of caution, that at least they have a statute they can point to. Then they can work with providers, as opposed to it becoming a philosophical difference at FAR. FAR can't be philosophical. FAR is opposing executing the law.
Right.
So
I
that's
think
why we said, you know what?
So I'm just going to add one more thing. That's why Jeff Lynn is on the policy, the procedures committee for FAR. And then Josh has his hand up. So yeah,
So that we're all, before I get to Josh, so that we're all on the same page. Dr. Schlosser, I think what you're saying is this is going to be a heavy lift because many providers are not accepting MAT right now. So that's, I like the idea that Jeff brings up, that put it into law. And if you want to be a recovery residence, whether certified or not, it doesn't say certified. It says recovery residents may not deny. So, okay, now Josh, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, thank you, Al. So we understand that it's a lack of education and a lack of how to effectively manage a MAT policy, MAT protocol. So FAR has preemptively developed MAT storage, medication storage and usage policy that is MAT focused. And we have a resident handbook version of that for the residents to show these providers, this is how you can effectively manage a MAT protocol. And there's a couple different ways, and we mentioned that. So we will be able to give this to the providers for their usage, so they can see that it's not so bad. It's not this whole big thing that's going to be time consuming and difficult. It's pretty straightforward and easy. So we've developed those templates for the providers.
Nobody's going to have the buprenorphine in their backpack, in other words.
Right.
Okay, Michael, you're up next.
Thanks, Al. And we appreciate the complexity of this issue and the sensitivity of this issue. And so my input has been not only as an attorney, but as a provider and a person in good standing of a 12-step based abstinence recovery program. And Dr. Schlosser, my brother from another mother, I don't know if you remember, but about 3-4 years ago, we had a meeting over this, and I've had a whole sea change attitude change since then. It turns out that there are very, very, very few places to send somebody to. And so I became adeptly aware of my responsibility as a provider to not only follow the law, but to do what's in the best interests of the clients. And I'm not the doctor. So we made a decision to step out, and by the way, this went against my abstinence-based recovery training. But as we all, as I think we can all agree, the world of abstinence-based recovery and treatment/recovery residences is not always the same. And so, sometimes they do intersect, and a lot of times they don't. And this seems to be one of the major areas where they do not. So we've had conversation after conversation after conversation about this at many levels, especially on the procedure committee. And what we've come to is not to use a sledgehammer, because it will scare people away. Now, whether they're certified or not, federal law still applies to them. But we certainly don't want certified providers to become non-certified providers because FAR is trying to level a hammer down on them. So I think the approach that we're thinking about taking, and if there's comment, that would be appreciated, is like everybody's saying, to educate the current providers, because I found out after all the concerns that I had at a very big facility, we had 115 beds, that it was not an issue. We talked about putting them in their own rooms so they didn't contaminate the rest of the residents, and we decided to do a little beta test. And it worked out to be one of the simplest things there ever was. And so a lot of it was fear of the unknown. And so to educate the current providers and then really start with the new applications when Josh and Heidi get a new application, to make sure that from the very get-go that we give them the tools and the experience that they need to implement this. So so I'm definitely in favor of this legislation. It's already restating what is already federal law, but providing a real clear way for people to go, because there are so few places that will take this. And I got the methadone question all the time. And of course, if it's a federally approved medication for OUD, then yes, of course, we had to take it. We don't take marijuana maintenance. We don't take Xanax maintenance. We don't take any of these things that are not federally approved. And I believe right now by the FDA, there's only 3, but I believe SAMHSA also has its own list, but I could be wrong. So thanks, Al.
Thank you, Mike. Terry? Don't get in an accident now.
Yeah.
Gotta unmute yourself. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm sorry I was late, everybody, and it's a great dialogue and discussion. Steve Farnsworth just put something in the chat box I think we should look at. But as I read this, the new proposed legislation, I'm still struggling with other medications that don't fall into, because when I hear you guys talk about MAT, what you're really referring to in most cases is opiate replacement therapy, methadone and Suboxone. But there's other medications that are prescribed by physicians that may or may not be for, it's to assist with it. They may say it's to assist with the treatment of substance use disorders, but are medications that there's no way that they're going to be allowed in recovery residences.
That's a good point, Terry. And I was thinking that when we were laughing about the Xanax,
Right.
Xanax is FDA approved, and I could see, just like those places that were allowing marijuana because they thought it was prescribed, but it's not, it's recommended. It's not legal, but there are all kinds of drugs that can be prescribed that would not be, would be unintended consequences. We need to think about that between now and
Yep, exactly.
let's think about that. But I have a kind of a solution, I think, to because what we have is, on the one hand, FAR wants to have an opportunity to train and to reduce the fear. On the other hand, the legislature meets in January. This could go into effect July 1st. So what I'm recommending is, well, what I'm thinking of doing here is beginning January 1st, 2025. And again, it's recovery residences. So you want to close your doors and no longer be a recovery residence, well, that's the fear, that there'll be less housing. But it's not just certified, it's any recovery residence. There's obviously no sanction attached to this. But you know, again, if you're gonna, it shouldn't be done just for certified. It should be done for every recovery residence that considers themselves one. Dr. Schlosser, you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I also have come across many times that certain residences have a limit to the milligram amount of a drug that could be prescribed, which is crazy. I mean, that, you know, I don't know where that comes from, but, you know, I think that kind of has to be addressed because it's very common.
Of course it
Yeah,
is.
good
That's something
point. Yeah.
that we've been talking about again, it with, you know, the Michael and Jeff and all of us, we've really been spending time talking about that because it really should be best practices, standard of care, right? No recovery resident operator, to my knowledge, is an MD, right? So, so the people who are prescribing medication need to prescribe the medication. The pushback from the recovery residents is lack of knowledge. So again, just like we've been saying, we need to educate them. So people like you could come and talk to the operators and explain the medicine. That's really helpful, right? Because again, we want to bring them in and not beat them over the head, but you are correct. You know, they would have no business deciding how much insulin you'd be taking, or, you know, how much estrogen, like I need some estrogen now, like how much you'd be taking. That wouldn't be appropriate, right? So it's the same thing. We hear you, and that is what we're trying to do, but maybe I should call you afterwards and get you to do some presentations for FAR.
Yeah, well, that was the second thing I was going to say is I am one of the peer mentors through the FADA program, through the SOR grant. And there are 8 of us, 8 physicians around the state. So that is the wheelhouse of what, you know, we are charged with really doing. So yeah, if you get.
So we should talk, because the other problem is still that there are so many silos and the silos don't talk to each other. So that's what I hope is also happening here, is that all the people who have skin in the game, if you will, are talking to each other, because that's been the problem, right? So that's great. I will reach out to you afterwards.
Okay. And, you know, as far as language, you know, we should somehow include all FDA approved medications for SUD, because that is what will be prescribed and that's what should be allowed.
We're with
That's
you.
better language.
I believe that's the language that we adopted.
Right.
Yeah. And you talked about prescribed medications, so there's no wiggle room. If a doctor prescribes it, that's the appropriate dosage. Terry, did you have a last word, or is that hand just up from before? You're good. Okay. All right, let's move on to this is great. Anybody against commencing this January 1st, 2025 to give FAR a chance to educate a little time here, rather than just dropping this on everybody next July? Or is it not necessary? We'll discuss it the 20th.
Let's discuss it the 20th, because there's pros and cons.
Yeah, let's move on.
Yeah, as a provider, I would rather it be sooner than later because, you know, we run into this issue all the time.
Okay. All right. I was just
Thank you.
okay. Let's move on to 4, please.
Okay, since before this came out, we're gonna eventually quickly, hopefully, get to what issue number 6 is. And number 6, I need to tell you about that first before we go to this. We're trying to create a definition of level 4 housing so that it can be consistent statewide. Providers, and we'll get to this in a second, why this all dovetails. So we're trying to make it consistent statewide so that everyone who's a level 4 is a level 4 under FAR's updated, revised definition. So you take that, and this language we've tweaked, I've tweaked this since yesterday. I gave it to Al, but again, we'll talk about it in September probably. The concept here is pretty straightforward. When a patient, client, resident, whatever, is in an outpatient treatment program, and they're in the recovery residence that is tied to that treatment program, those residents, those patients shouldn't lose their both federally and statutorily protected confidentiality rights as to their identification as being suffering with a substance use disorder, being labeled as an addict or anything. Very strict confidentiality laws that have a lot of exceptions, and that's all laid out in statute. And it's laid out, the statute that's cited there is 397.5017. And what that statutory section does is it incorporates, adopts as Florida statute, the federal framework paradigm of protections for people with substance use disorders who are in treatment. FAR wants to rightfully, in my opinion, extend those privacy protections to people that are in FAR level 4 housing, because that housing is part of the treatment program. And so it's not what we've been experiencing, and we've presented this to Al, are a lot of situations where law enforcement, they are fully aware of this law. They're also fully aware of HIPAA, which is similar but not as strict as what we're talking about now. You may have heard 42 CFR Part 2 or called as Part 2. Part 2 was codified into Florida statute using that 397.501. So the suggestion is, if you're in a treatment program, you're in an outpatient treatment program, and you're in housing that's what we're going to call community housing in a second, if you're in, which is level 4, so if you're in a level 4 housing program and treatment program, that you don't lose your confidentiality simply because you walk out of the door of the treatment program and step into your recovery residence. That confidentiality and the restrictions against undue disclosures, privacy of identification, things that law enforcement has to do to get certain information, the patient should continue to enjoy those benefits because it meets the state or the federal and state policy of providing this heightened confidentiality protection over people going through treatment. So that's all that issue 4 tries to accomplish. We've tweaked the language a little bit, different from what you've seen now, but the concept is the same.
Any comments, questions? All right, the only thing I'm looking, when it comes
You're talking to law enforcement, right?
Yeah, when it comes to records, our law enforcement sober homes task force has always looked at recovery residences as treatment providers when it comes to records. What I'm trying to find out is whether this concept, extends to, hey, is John Doe there? And whether to extend it to a recovery residence where no treatment is being performed. There are any records, we would do a Title 42 before going and investigating an individual recovery residence, because we might find records there, and so we don't want to have that issue pop up. The other thing is law enforcement has to legitimately go and investigate criminal activity where they get a call. If there's an OD in a recovery residence, I guarantee you the officers will be coming in. I don't think it's a good idea to have them wait several hours for a warrant just to go in and investigate. They're not looking for records. They're not looking even for identity of people necessarily from the provider itself. They will be talking to people because they're all witnesses to a potential crime, because anybody who overdoses has gotten the drugs from somewhere and somebody committed a crime. They're generally the victims. I can also say that at no time in the last 7.5 years has the Sober Homes Task Force law enforcement side ever investigated or prosecuted a person for being addicted to drugs or using drugs. We don't do that. We go by the Title 42, even if we don't have one because of exigent circumstances. So the only thing that I'm going to vet in the next 3 weeks, I certainly don't have a problem about the records. In other words, if you read, and I'll have this to you, we'll send this out to everybody, but if you read 397.501.7, it talks about the record of service providers which pertain to the identity, diagnosis, and prognosis of this of any individual. That's not what I'm talking about, and I don't want this to be confused that law enforcement can't come in and investigate a crime because a house manager meets them at the front door and says, you can't come in. So if we get past that hurdle, if we have to massage the wording, we'll see what happens. And that's my only caveat. Anybody have any comments or questions?
Yeah, Al, as we talked about, you know, I know that you're thinking with your law enforcement hat on, and I respect and appreciate that. I think that this request and legislation is fair, and what I'm hearing is, hey, we don't want to hamper the ability of law enforcement to do their job, which I agree with. But my opinion is that federal law has made the decision already that there are certain the privacies that are to be afforded to people that while they're in treatment supersede that to some degree. And it's been a very well-worn path that all of the fear that, you know, people can put up a blockade because it's a recovery residence if we pass this is just not true. The existing laws exist. There's a vast majority. There's more exceptions to the warrant requirement than there is to get a warrant under federal and state law. So all this doesn't change anything. It just says for those level 4 recovery residences. I mean, it'd be no different if it was inpatient treatment. So then why would it be different if it's a level 4 tied to outpatient? It should be the same, and it's narrow for that.
Well, we'll move on, and this is something to flesh out by the 20th. But let me give you a real case scenario, and I'm not going to identify the provider, the house, or the jurisdiction. But we had a young woman, 3 days in Florida, overdose and die, and is discovered in the morning. Now, it happened in this particular instance that fire rescue showed up, but not law enforcement. And according to the family of the victim, the drug dealer who sold her the drugs, the fentanyl that she died of, was all over her phone. And we're all over the law enforcement agency that didn't show up. But had they showed up, you know, they need to go in there and they need to investigate this. They're not looking for records. And technically, you know, 501, 397, 5017 doesn't talk about that. And whether you call it an exigent circumstance or they're doing their job. And of course, a lot of the recovery residences, level 1 and 2 especially, people are not on treatment. They're just choosing to live together in a sober environment. So I don't want to belabor this. We're going to have this conversation, and we'll come up with something. Maybe we'll tweak it, and we'll use the language that's in as far as diagnosis, prognosis of, you know, that kind of thing. Anyhow, let's move on because we still have a lot to cover, and we only have about 45 minutes to do it. Issue 5.
Okay, issue 5 is Terrell. I'm assuming Terrell's still here.
Hopefully.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, Terrell, I'm going to ask you to chime in when I'm going to explain this, and then if it's okay, I'll turn it over to you and Terrell to
100%.
whatever you want. Okay, so here's an issue that's popped up with repeated consistency. I'm going to give you a little bit of background and context really quick, is that cities across the state have been grappling with what they view as the Airbnb vacation rental fiasco for years now, where you have, you know, we used to complain, we're like, oh, there's a party house in the neighborhood. That's a sober house. I'm like, oh, that's a vacation rental. That's not a sober living residence. Because, you know, stereotypically people, you know, they just vacation, they party all night. Residents complain about it. What do you do? Well, the Florida legislature, in its great wisdom, rather than letting local governments try to fix that, they just preempted everyone. Said, sorry, if after 2011, if you don't have a law on the books regarding vacation rentals by 2011, you're preempted. You can't pass one that in this in-state statute that I put in the issue. It's right in, I think it's like 509. It says a local law, ordinance, or regulation may not prohibit vacation rentals, or, and this is important, or regulate the duration or frequency of rental of vacation rentals. If, you know, going forward. We've been experiencing for years now cities that have been using before their, what we call a transient use ordinance. The number of times a dwelling could be occupied. You know, in a hotel, it makes no issue. It gets turned over right once a week. But in a dwelling, cities wanted to prevent that turnover, especially you'll see like in coastal towns that are small, like they're kind of touristy, where they're literally their cities would overnight become a vacation rental destination and overwhelm. So those cities long ago, Treasure Island on the West Coast, one such city is Lake Worth Beach, has one of those laws on the books that potentially predates. Well, what cities are doing to sober living now are saying, hey, you can't be in this neighborhood because you're violating the turnover requirement. Your residents aren't staying for a year. They may stay for 60, 90 days, 120 days, and that's illegal in our city. Well, by making that illegal, it hinders the ability of sober living residences to do what they do, especially level 3 and 4. And so what we did is we said, well, this is being used more and more, and we know it's because people call FAR all the time. Hey, the city's doing this to me. So what we recommended through FAR and other legislation is this language, which duplicates to some degree the preemption for vacation rentals, and put this in 397-487 to say a local law, ordinance, or regulation may not regulate the duration or frequency of resident stay in a certified recovery residence. And then the current language is in areas where multi-family uses are allowed. And then this paragraph doesn't apply to any local laws adopted before January 1, 2024. So it doesn't preempt existing laws. It grandfathers all those painful existing laws in, except for Terrell's and Coconut Creek, which is I love. Now I know that Terrell has some questions or comments about multifamily uses and multifamily zoning. So I wanted to give her the floor, but give you a quick, before I do that, let me just finish my opening statement, as they say. The question here is not the zoning. Zoning, you can call zoning anything. Cities are broken down into districts and they're given names: single family, multifamily. They're given letters: RG1, MF3, RS2. That means nothing. They're just designations a city gives. Then you look in the code and say, okay, I'm zoned R1. What can I do in R1? How big can I build my building? That's how that works. But you can call it anything. And so my concern, and I know others' concerns, were that this is being used more frequently, and what we're trying to avoid is in multifamily structures, where in multifamily zoning areas where you have higher turnover, this preemption really shouldn't be objected to, we feel, from cities, because it's only doing it in multifamily structures. There's been some comment back, and I'll turn over to Terrell. It'd rather say multifamily zoning. My concern is that, again, is the city can just decide to take a whole swath of land. You don't have to rezone it, just relabel it. This used to be called multifamily. We're now calling it a sunny day zoning. You call it something else, but call it something besides multifamily zoning, and you quickly undermine the entire intent of the statute. So it's really important, I think, for the people who've spoken to me when drafting this, that the focus is on allowing multifamily uses and multifamily structures, no matter what the zoning is. Because if there's a multifamily structure in single family zoning, that means that it was multifamily for a period of time, meaning the area, and the city just, like I just said, decided to rezone it to a single family use. And under the proposal to make it only multifamily zoning, that's what cities could, in my opinion, that's what cities could do, just with a wave of a wand, rename their zoning districts, and then gut the entire intent and purpose of this temporary preemption. So that's my speech on that. I know Terrell has a lot to comment back too.
Thank you, Jeff. Terrell, your thoughts?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Al, for giving me the opportunity to comment on this, and Jeff for putting it together. I understand the intent, and I understand that there is a need to address this and the turnover as it relates to multifamily. However, my concern with the use of the words either multifamily uses or multifamily structures is that you could end up capturing non-conforming uses. You could have a multifamily structure in a single family zoning district at this point, and maybe the structure's been there for 60 years or something, but it's otherwise a single family zoning district. All single family homes are around it. Another concern I have is that different jurisdictions have different definitions of multifamily structure or multifamily uses, but multifamily zoning districts are pretty uniform from jurisdiction to jurisdiction as far as how they're defined. And so in that regard, I think you're going to end up with more consistent application of the statute. Additionally, I know that you have concerns that different jurisdictions may try to essentially skirt the law and do an end run around it by coming up with a new title or, something along those lines for their multifamily zoning districts if we go that route. I just don't think that's likely because the impacts would be far and wide. And, you know, there's due process that would be involved. But aside from that, honestly, local governments at this point in time are more focused on the Live Local Act and how that has usurped home rule and the impacts of turning their industrial and commercial zoning districts into essentially multifamily. So this would not even be likely to be anything that would occur to them on that level. This is just, it just isn't. I am concerned, however, that if you say multifamily uses or multifamily structures, that you really are including way more than is necessary or intended. And again, you're likely to impact those areas that are mostly single family in nature. And then I think you are going to end up with objections from the Florida League of Cities and the Florida
Okay.
Carol, can I respond to that? Al, just we've experienced,
And
you know, I know Al, you like. No, not rhetorical. Just it's look, I've known Terrell for, oh my God, I'm gonna say how long now. We've been friends. Terrell, the concern there is that, and you know, Al's like, we're not guessing. This is actually happening. And an example, a large example, is the city of West Palm Beach. They have a huge zoning code of various districts. They have like 20 different zoning districts, way too many, I think, to be useful. And there's an area of the city that has a lot of multifamily structures, quadplex, you know, like 2 and 2 apartments or 3 triplexes that exist all over the place. And the city has just labeled the zoning, you know, SF3P2, whatever, in parentheses, single family. But it's not a single family zoning district in reality, just what they're calling it. And you have these multifamily structures all over the place. So it's not as if, you know, you have these areas where it's basically, okay, all of these multifamily buildings that otherwise can, you know, provide all these housing, we're because we've rezoned this area single family, that was a safe one. We just dodged that bullet. That's what we're trying to avoid. Is the reality on the ground is whatever you call the zoning. And I agree, we're not talking about rezoning property. If it was a rezonal property, yes, there'd be 3 public hearings, as you know. It's a big statutory scheme. I'm not talking about rezoning. I'm talking about just changing the label. It's not a text amendment. It's not changing the list of permitted uses. It's just changing the label of a zoning district to rename it. And that's what I'm concerned about, is just by renaming it something that's not multifamily, and the city's like, oh, this doesn't apply. That's why the uses and structures, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but there has to be some middle ground, because it's been our experience that cities are going to do whatever they can, especially with the Live Local Act. There's plenty of cities that have gotten ahead of it and start calling a bunch of zoning districts mixed use.
Let's
just calling it mixed use. So
let's work on some language, because Terrell's concerns are all as valid as your concerns. You're worried that a municipality is going to do an end run. Terrell's worried that there's one grandfathered multi-use facility or house with apartments that is in the middle of a residential area, and if you word this incorrectly, that one structure out of 350 or 1,000 is going to make that district ripe for multi-use recovery residences.
No, that's true. But Al, but also I forgot to mention. I really am sorry I forgot to mention this. The other context of this is that, and I promise I'm not trying to disparage anyone. I'm just saying what's happening is that cities are on speed dial with Dan Lauber to get all these ordinances adopted in these cities. And each time an ordinance is proposed, it's worse than the last one. Because the cities keep changing them to make them hard. They're getting worse. So really the purpose of this is because the state, you know, we fought hard to get a statewide study. We fought hard to get an appropriation, or you fought hard to get that. And cities are to some degree going to be racing, if they're not already doing it, to what my experience has been, making sober living more complicated to get approved. I know that Josh Thrasher and Heidi from FAR, we talked about this a lot. They experience this a lot. So maybe, and I'm not suggesting this as an offer right now, but maybe we talk about having a sunset provision on this until such time as the statewide model zoning ordinance comes out or something like that. As just a thought. Because that's really the purpose of this, is to put the brakes on, you know, all of these changes that are going on right now, that by the time that we respond to them, the statewide studies could be meaningless because all the cities and counties of import where sober living is thriving and there's recovery communities, those are the counties and cities that are doing what they can to make it as hard as possible for sober living to exist.
Well,
And I get they're representing the city. That's true. That's not what, look, I think that's why they're doing it. That's me because I'm an advocate.
okay.
That's the effect of what they're doing. The impact of what they're doing is, so we want to put brakes on that, at least in multifamily. This isn't even talking single family zoning, just multifamily zoning in multifamily areas. So I agree with Terrell, we got to find middle ground, but if it's just says multifamily zoning and nothing more, we may have wasted our time on this.
Well,
So, to be discussed or continued.
But anyway, Jeff, let's get to Tori and then to
Yeah.
Mayor. Tori.
Yeah, I was unmuting. Thank you. So, look, I appreciate everybody's opinion on this, but I would like to remind everybody that at this very moment, there are across the United States multiple different lawsuits, and recently an actual, what I would say was a victory for recovery residents community over local laws out of California. And there's, as was mentioned in the very beginning of this meeting, that, who's going to really sue? Well, recently there were some issues with another city that I won't name that really galvanized a lot of people to actually realize what's happening. And in the beginning of this meeting, at the same time, we saw a lot of really wonderful statistics. And those statistics showed victory, really, moving year to year over what is considered a scourge going on in our communities that are affecting everybody. And without proper recovery residences attached to treatment and the aftercare after you graduation on this treatment, all those statistics are going to reverse. And why are they going to reverse? Because addiction isn't able to be legislated by not having a place to have treatment. And so if you're going to create zoning laws that don't take into account what the treatment industry is now, where we are today, telling you we need, then all you're doing is saying that we don't or do like something, and we're not going to listen to people on the front line. And while I appreciate that people were thinking about this in terms of 2016, 17, 18, 19, the treatment industry today, especially in Florida and South Florida, due to a lot of hard work, has come a long way. And if we don't have proper zoning that goes along to allowing us to be integrated into providing this treatment, then there is no treatment industry. And I want to follow up on this with saying that if I were to buy a multifamily structure, even in a non-conforming zone, because I hear this talked about all the time, well, it might have been built 60 years ago, but that doesn't matter, because 60 years ago it was built for its intended purpose, and unless it burns down, then it's a non-conforming use, which means I can utilize it for the unrelated party rule within that situation. So if I bought a folio multifamily structured property whose original intended use had 8 units individually metered and addressed, I could put the according amount of people into each of those units that fit within standardized zoning codes. So all that you're doing is talking about an individualized discriminatory practice against one certain industry. And I don't think that's necessarily yet been tested, legally. I think right now you've just seen a lot of cities pass things without any pushback. And I would prefer that all of us cooperate to create a non-enmity environment where we can adhere to what would be needed for all of our individuals we serve. And cities serve their populations. Those populations have family members and themselves going through addiction treatment, as was mentioned earlier, that most of the patients now are in Florida. And one of the reasons for that is a change to in-network on the exchange, which Florida is the #1 state in the country for in-network insurance. So we are a leader in helping to provide resources to get treatment. And if we take away the recovery residents' capability within those networks, all you're doing is removing treatment. And that's because you can't have successful treatment without those recovery residences. So I would like to have a further discussion on this, because I can tell you without being dramatic, if we do not take care of this multifamily intended use for the structure's original creation, then there isn't treatment, and you're going to have more people just on the street with addiction. That's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Tori. And we have a meeting on the 20th, so there's a lot to discuss and a lot to do. Mayor Weiss.
Thank you. Sorry about my delay in getting into this meeting, but I have to concur with Terrell on this. I mean, as somebody who sees a lot of obviously land use and zoning changes, and also being a resident of the city of West Palm Beach. So I live in a single family neighborhood, but everybody is entitled to have an ADU by right. So that makes us all multifamily potentially. And I don't think that's what anybody's intent is. So I have to agree that if you're going, and also understanding that there are non-conforming uses, and if it's a non-conforming use, then of course it's an allowable use. So as was just mentioned, but I think the language where multifamily uses are allowed would then open up single family homes, single family neighborhoods. I think that's just too broad of a term.
Well, I'll say this, and I've said it for 7.5 years, that we move the needle as far as we can move the needle. Zoning districts at least does something. We'll continue the discussion. We have another meeting on the 20th. It'll be dedicated solely to proposed legislation. And thank you. If there are any other comments, we need to move on. We've got another 2 issues before we even get to the 419, which we may not get to today, but we'll definitely be talking about it on the 20th. Okay, let's move on to issue number 6, level 4.
Yeah, Al, thanks. This is the last issue of this right now, and should be quick. What we're trying to do finally is, and what FAR's been trying to do for some time, is start to define what level 4 means in Florida. It's very unique. It's the Florida model. It's well regarded. It's duplicated. It has a name. Across the country, it's known as the Florida model, and not only in Florida, it's duplicated. And so what we're trying to do by creating a definition here is a couple of things, and there's a reason for this. And the main reason of this proposal was, one, to start to define and to start helping to define level 4. The genesis of that, as Corey, I think, mentioned, is there is a local city that has decided, they've calmed down a little bit, but they've decided that level 3, level 4 homes, first of all, are assisted living facilities and are to be treated like assisted living facilities. And we're adamant that there are clinical services there and it should be treated like that. And when we dug down deeper, we found out that on the FAR website, which copied the NAR website when FAR first was created, if you remember my earlier conversation from about 2 hours ago, that the NAR level 4 is not like FAR level 4. NAR level 4 is clinical. It's inpatient treatment, where FAR level 4 is not. But FAR level 4 is directly tied to a treatment program. So one, we wanted to start putting some structure around that as a definition. 2, because there's already the concept under the day or night treatment with community housing license, there's already this term community housing that's not defined. We thought we'd give it a definition. So by the way, so on this, if you could scroll down a little bit, Al, on my screen, I'm not seeing the bottom. Yeah, that's a typo where it says community residence. It meant to say community housing, so I apologize, that's just a typo. The concept of community housing is meant to be the definition of day or night treatment with community housing. Not just for that level of care, but any level of care, any license where the owner, operator is requiring their resident patients live in their recovery residence as part of their program, that is a level 4 program, no matter what anyone calls it. So another part of the genesis of this was older FAR providers that may have gotten to level 3 early on when FAR was still trying to figure out the distinctions between what's 3 and what's 4. Remember, it didn't line up. So FAR was doing its best to try to align these uses, and there's a number of providers that are level 3 that really should be level 4 because they are providing full-blown housing for their residents in an IOP. Some of those people have registered as only level 2s, and that's inappropriate. And the reason we care is because the distinctions on housing isn't more intensity, it's just you're dealing with a different population. And if you are providing treatment and you're providing the housing for those people to be in treatment, and you are requiring them live there as part of an integrated housing model, by far definition, and the FAR board has met on this on many occasions. I don't know if Josh Thrasher wants to chime in. They decided, look, we gotta, rather than getting bullied by others as the difference between 3 and 4, we just, same thing as before the MAT. FAR wants to be able to point to a statute and say, look, stop arguing with us. You're a level 4. You will be registered as a level 4. You'll be regulated as a level 4, and rightfully so. That's the intended purpose of this statute, is to start to create framework over what we can define a level 4 is and is not. And so we're calling this community housing as a definition. And the goal, and so the last reason we're doing this, I think we may have discussed this, it'd be great. Maybe if we could have someone speak on this, but ASAM, I think we said this, ASAM has officially incorporated the NAR levels of housing into its placement criteria. And so FAR felt, and others felt, we need to get ahead of this, because that placement criteria wasn't only for day, night, and community housing, as we call it, PHP, it's for all levels. And so we wanted to get ahead of that and say, we don't care what you call it, provider, we don't care what you call it, ASAM. For us at the level 4, we're going to regulate it as a level 4, we're going to certify it as a level 4, and we're going to hold those providers to that higher standard because of the population that they're treating. And that's the purpose of this proposal.
Before we open this up, there's a couple of things that concern me right off the bat. Number one, community housing should mean a certified recovery residence. It should, I mean, non-certified residences would not be community, they have to be certified by state law, because they're
and now we
direct link to the program. What?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm saying, no, we had talked that in the, yes, that's not in the proposal, but the revised proposal after meetings clearly says that, or it's in there. Yeah.
There's a couple other tweaks in there language-wise, which are not, but
yeah, we need to tweak still. Yeah.
The only other thing that that concerns me is when you say, because this is the heightened residence. Okay, this is a level 4. This is the highest level that you got. And when you say down on the 4th line, community housing is appropriate for persons who need housing while undergoing any non-inpatient level of care.
Yeah, inpatient.
IOP in my mind can never be level 4. Maybe somebody with clinical experience can tell me it can be, but we're talking about the Florida model, which is the day or night. And I think you could probably squeeze in there IOP because those are intensive outpatient treatment modalities. But if you open it up to any persons who need housing, well, that's completely subjective. And
but Al, the problem is you have another 10 reasons why we're proposing this. One of the top ones too is that people are mixing and matching. They're like, oh, I'm not a level 4, so I can have all different kinds of people in my house.
Okay.
And that was I mean, I see Josh's hands up. Maybe Josh could help explain the problem that FAR's been facing.
Let's hear from Josh, but think about what I said, because all this does is codify mixing and matching all different kinds of people at different levels.
No, just the opposite. It's just the opposite. I understand what you're saying. You're saying is if it's a level 4, you can mix and match PHP, IOP. No, that's not intended either. So let's hear from Josh and what we can fix that.
So thank you, Al. So for us here at FAR, like level 4 is if there's a clinical component, there's a requirement to attend your clinical services and this housing is available to you, you're a level 4, PHP or day night, IOP or OP. So what we're having happen, there's some providers across the state is they don't want to pay for staff 24/7 because level 4 is 24 hours staffed, and level 2 you just have a house manager, limited supervision. They have a job, they go to sleep at night. So for that population, especially like day night, so you relapse, like sometimes you're not going to search for a detox, and you may search for PHP though, or IOP. And so then you've coming just off a relapse, and you're just going to put them right back into a home that doesn't have 24-hour supervision. You're just going to put them in there with a house manager that's sleeping at night, where you can do whatever you want. So what providers are trying to do is like save the money that they should be spending on staff. And the bed fees are, it's higher bed fees for us at level 4, but that's really not the factor. It's primarily they don't want to spend, $100,000 in salaries a year to be a level 4 and have it staffed appropriately. And so they're just saying they're level 2, and what they're saying is, well, it's not a requirement. We have some guys that go into our clinical services, and some guys, they just go to meetings and they work a job. So that's mixing the population that shouldn't be mixing. So if you're attending any type of clinical services, I know it's a higher clinical hour count for PHP, for IOP and OP, but I would like to get away from that because I think there's a safety issue regarding this. And if a provider is doing that, just wanting to save on some salaries and not provide the care that they're needing, I think they need to reconsider exactly what they're in this business to do.
Right. So, and let me add to this. Part of that issue is just simply put, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck or a dog, it's a duck. So some of the facilities or some of the recovery residents operate, they're just moving people around for that purpose. So this was a way to clarify it, as well as, ensure that the folks in a level 4 are getting what they need, right? So that's the other issue, Al, is like the substance abuse treatment industry and the recovery resident industry. You could say one thing, but we want you to do it. So that's just a way to clarify that level 4.
Okay.
But we can work on it. I mean, right, we all agree that it needs, but it's just, we have to start somewhere.
Okay, Tori and then Terry.
Yeah, let me say, Josh, great job. Susan, thank you. So it is due to historical inaccuracies and misnomers and so forth, very little understood that if you are a level 4, by definition, and what is being clarified here, and what Josh has mentioned, what Susan mentioned, what Jeff is mentioning, what this does, and Al, I want to make sure you understand it, because what you've said was what it does with what you were worried it didn't do. Because what this is doing is it's defining what you actually brought up. So PHP with community housing license does not exist in the insurance mantra of conversation. And if you are a level 4 receiving, as is mentioned, clinical services, it means you're receiving in an outpatient scenario, clinical services per authorized or already pre-authorized levels of care, either what are called PHP, pardon me, the day-night. So PHP, partial hospitalization, IOP, intensive outpatient, OP, outpatient. So if you're in a legitimate level 4, then the housing with which you own through lease, title, or deed, right, possess through lease, title, or deed, are solely for individuals that have met clinical requirement. Now, what we didn't put in here, and it was a small conversation, and I say that laughingly, with Jeff, was one of the things that I thought you could mention was meeting ASAM requirements. Because if you are in a level 4 program, in order to receive clinical treatment, you have met one of the ASAM criteria guidelines within the levels 2.1, 2.7, 3, and so forth up to detox. But outpatient is PHP. Insurance doesn't really term it day-night. That's a DCF terminology. Insurance doesn't give me my contracts or in network that say day-night. It says PHP, IOP, and then if it covers it, OP services, as well as medical services, which are considered separate from the group services that are PHP, IOP, OP. What this does is it clarifies, generally speaking, once and for all, that if you are in a level 4 recovery residence, certified by FAR, then you are there in that residence because you have met authorized criteria for PHP, IOP, OP. However, it further allows for that same level 4 program to treat someone that may not be with our recovery residents. They might be married, maybe staying at their own home. They may be at a level 1, 2, or 3, but they are not being denied treatment because they would meet criteria to be here too, but they may not want to live in our recovery residence, or we may not have enough bed capacity. So they might be staying with a level 2, a 1, or a 3, or they could even be staying at an Oxford residence, but still attending us, meeting that criteria for clinical and medical care. And that's what this does. And what Josh mentioned, I just want to end with this. Josh is mentioning that this is going to clean up, and Susan mentioned it. It's going to clean up someone going to Josh, someone going to Susan, and going to FAR and saying, I have my license from DCF, and I'm going to mix and match level 1, 2, 3, and 4 residences, meaning someone who might have just gotten out of detox, going through post-acute withdrawals on fentanyl relapse. They just came in and they're sitting with someone who would meet a more criteria to be in a level 2 setting. This prevents the mix and match. That's what this statute does.
Okay. Terry?
Well said, Tori. Yeah, you got my pretty much my comments covered. So thank you. The only other comment I would make is, you know, as much as I'm not a fan of California and some of the other states, they do have residential treatment centers licensed within, you know, houses and communities to provide treatment in the house that we don't have here, and has kind of pushed us to do things differently in Florida. Whether that's, you know, good or bad, I still think that the DCF regulations, we just need to start all over again and rewrite them for treatment. I give Jeff and Susan that task of,
Or maybe go to ACA and have them write rules.
yeah,
Which is probably
We're getting there. That's the yearly march we're going for.
Does this move the bar forward toward the idea that when you consider recovery residences, certified recovery residences, as an adjunct to the treatment, that they should be included in coverage by payers?
Yes.
Move that
That's reason number 372. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, I put my hand up because I'm getting used to this now with the hand, but that is, yes. I mean, and not only that,
yes.
I just want to follow up with what Susan and Josh, and then I apologize. I believe it was Terry, because I'm Tori, so it was Terry. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. I'm close in name. So we in Florida are trying, those of us who are here, are you know, attending, which I'm very appreciative as a guest, and those of you who have been doing this for a long time. What's happening here is we need to push this ball forward to actually define what's already a fact with people who've been doing it right, which is providing correct levels of treatment and correct definitions for where people belong, so people can stop intermixing and creating a problem of what you used to call the Florida shuffle, which was people coming in, coming out, coming in, coming out, and getting away with a lot of things. And each one of these levels, level 1, 2, 3, and 4, are incredibly intricate to the system. What's been missing, and what Terry was mentioning, that one thing they do well out West, is really define what happens in the highest level of outpatient, whereas we kind of jumbled it. And what this is going to do, give FAR the ability to continue that education of, let us show you what you are and let us tell you how to do it. If you want to do it, these are probably going to incur you some extra costs, but it's for ethics, morals, and it actually puts us in unison with federally chartered insurance companies, which, Al, to move that ball forward without defining this integrated level 4 scenario, insurance will never treat us correctly. So doing this will get us to tell insurance and do what they already think is a fact, because all my contracts are in network are already talking of it just like this fact. So that was to say yes to you, Al. That's my longer yes.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or thoughts? We'll be meeting on the 20th. We have a lot of work to do. Now I think that concludes this section. And in the remaining 10 minutes, because we're not going to come to, well, the amending of chapter 419, which is the next one, is going to be a perilous journey. We're kind of jumping the gun a little bit. I'll just like set the table with this. One could say we're jumping the gun on some of this because we don't have the statewide study yet that can, there's been some mention about the various codes that have been adopted through studies done by Dan Lauber, who's the preeminent expert on the FHA ADA and how municipalities are to govern themselves. And one of the problems is that a municipality or local government can accept or reject any part of the recommended code or codes. What we're trying to do is we're trying to get a template that shows the best practice in state law so that local government doesn't have to pay $40,000 to $80,000 for a study, and they can adopt this. Now, one of the things we were talking about is there will be necessarily a change to chapter 419, which is a very skimpy one section chapter right now that is out of touch, out of step, hasn't been changed, and is, I think, honored more in the breach than it is in following it, and probably violates the ADA and the FHA in its current form. But there is a lot of fine tuning that needs to be done, especially when we're not doing this with a study. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hand the ball to Terrell to give us about 3 or 5 minutes in general, and then open it up in general. We're not going to be able to go through the specific, I'm not going to call them recommendations. I mean, these are kind of like thoughts that have been put out there. There's nothing in stone here. I think a lot of it goes in the right direction, if not most of it, including definitions and being able to get us to more understand the role of housing in recovery and the way to meld it into a community without having the pitchforks and the torches come out, which has been our purpose for the last 7.5 years. So, Terrell, why don't you give us like an overview of, as you see it, of what is there and what needs to be done. And then I'll open it up to a couple of comments, and then we'll end for the day, reconvene on the 20th. Everybody send me your ideas. Send them directly to me. And these are some templates you can use as starting points. So go ahead. Carol?
Chapter 419, or specifically section 419.001, which is the only code section within chapter 419 of the Florida statutes, does provide for currently site selection of community residential homes for people with all different kinds of disabilities, as is defined there by the different agencies that essentially license them. I will say that Jeffrey Lynn did the heavy lift by making most of the amendments. I did provide some commentary to that. In short, I think as it relates to community residential home, I believe that Jeffrey was trying to clean up that definition there to make it more clear as to the applicability to essentially recovery residences as well that are certified under FAR. I just want to make clear that in the process of cleaning this up, that we clarify that dwelling unit does not include residential treatment as defined under chapter 397, section 397.311A9, or residential treatment under ACA, because what we're saying is that these are dwelling units intended to be allowed in residential zoning districts. So I just think we need to clarify that. I'm sorry, I'm almost like acting like I'm going to move the screen and I can't do it from my iPad, but Anyhow, thank you so much, sorry. As we go down, there is some additional clarification. I don't really have any changes to the definition of authorizing entity, which was changed from licensing simply to reflect certification through FAR as the certifying entity. And then even resident, the definition of that, I don't have any issues there, or the clarifications to the plan residential community definition, which Jeffrey had put in. Community residential homes is really kind of the next stop on the second page. That provides for, it may provide housing to 2 residents per lawfully established bedroom. So it's automatically providing for up to 2 residents per bedroom. It is removing the distance requirements that were previously imposed by state law, which I don't believe any study was performed in order to allow for those distance requirements. And so some may argue that they were kind of arbitrarily placed into the statute. And so it is good to remove those. The 2 residents per bedroom, obviously, if you have a larger house, you may have more residents in there. I'm not really prepared to comment on that at this time, but I do want to just bring your attention to it. Additionally, it does say, I guess the trigger point that we kind of discussed earlier in the meeting is that the trigger point would be with the proof of licensure or certification as part of the annual payment of the local business tax receipt. So that's kind of the point at which a local jurisdiction would become aware essentially that they have a community residential home in their community. And then as it relates to 3A, which is showing there, it seems, I had simply commented that it seemed that the language that we discussed earlier as related to the frequency of stay or duration, the turnover language, if you will, that we were discussing earlier, that would probably be appropriately listed here. And that had to do with the language pertaining to 397.487 8B15. However, I will say that since we haven't reached an agreement on the language yet, maybe it's better to leave it out at this point. Additionally, looking at 3B on the next, as you scroll down, I do believe 60 days, which was already within the statute, is more reasonable. I know that for FAR certification of the, you're giving 90 days to obtain a certified recovery residence administrator, maybe 90 days to be consistent with that. But at the very least, the 60 days that was already there, just given holidays and whatnot, I think would be fair for a local government to essentially review and respond. It appears that the way it's drafted, it's essentially providing for an administrative review only. And it's providing some criteria to either approve or deny the home, but mostly it's administrative review. There is a reference to under subsection 3, there is a reference to under 3A3 to the distance of 660 feet. I did make a comment simply that we might want to wait for the study that we have Dan Lauber teed up to perform on a statewide level before we put in a distance. I do understand from discussing with Jeffrey that that was a placeholder. Additionally, I just simply stated that I think we need to be mindful of, because there is some language in 3 about a local government shall adopt a mechanism in its zoning scheme consistent with the Federal Fair Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act to reasonably accommodate housing providers. I had added as applicable or requested. Essentially, this is to presumably to locate within that zoning, that distance, that 660 feet. I simply wanted to clarify that, not every local government imposes zoning distances between residences. And additionally, I don't know that every local government would want to do that. And so to kind of impose upon them the requirement that they would have to come up with this reasonable accommodation process to fit something within it, if they're not adopting this particular statute by reference in their code, could be deemed to be a usurpation of home rule, and I have some concerns with that, and just wanted to point that out. Otherwise, the rest of the language, for the most part, I believe to be fairly benign, for lack of a better term, fairly, acceptable from the standpoint of local governments. That being said, I'm not representing anybody in making that comment. I haven't shopped it around with either my city or any local government that I represent. It's merely my personal opinion. I did try to clarify in subsection 7. If you scroll up just a little bit, it looks like the authorizing entity shall not issue a license, I clarified, or certification to a provider if the agency does not notify the local government. So it just seemed that we've included certification throughout the rest of chapter 419. We needed to include it there. But the really big sticking point or concern that I have really just has to do with the definition of dwelling unit. I think we need to define that and make sure that we don't unintentionally provide for or guide cities to provide for residential treatment either under 397 or under ACA to be allowed within residential zoning districts. I don't think that's the intent, and I don't want that to be an unintended consequence of this cleanup.
Before we get a comment or two, understand that 419 applies to all community residences. All residences, whether multi-family or single family, that are intended for persons with disabilities. No treatment's done in the house. It's a community house where they residence where they are part of the community and operate as a family. So this does not just apply to recovery residences, and for example, the spacing distances applies to all community residences, just not just recovery residences. I think I have that right. Again, these are thoughts, and want everybody to read it again, and come loaded for bear, because we're gonna come up with some final language, especially on this. If I say it's a big if, we include 419 in a sober homes task force bill. The book is out on that. Any comments or questions before we break? Okay. I'll hopefully see everybody on the 20th. That's Wednesday, 20th of September. It will be dedicated to legislation writing or tweaking. Just so you know, I mean, full disclosure, Dave Ehrenberg, along with his staff, we will decide what happens and what legislation will be presented. Do want all of your thoughts, all of your wisdom and your experience and your comments, because that's very helpful. In other words, it's not a vote. Anybody have anything for the good and welfare? Anybody from the public? Thank you so much. There's a lot to chew on. Here. Some really good stuff. And some stuff that it's like 40 years ago, whoever thought of a cell phone? That's what we're doing. We're gonna save some lives and make some changes in the system. And think about ACA for next year if you want to get ahead of the curve. How we're going to get ACA to replace DCF. Just saying, not the DC, not a slap at DCF. They're doing their job. They're doing what they're doing the best they can. And I've talked to them, many times. But why this is not a medical issue, not housing, but treatment. Anybody's guess. But anyway, enough of me. Anybody have a last comment? Yes, Tara?
Thank you, Al.
Oh, thank you, Lori. I'll see you on the 7th. The
Yes.
first meeting of the Alliance.
This 6th, actually.
Oh,
The meeting on September.
I won't be a day late. I'll see you on the 6th. I know it's a Wednesday.
Okay. Yes.
Okay.
I wanted to
Carol.
clarify whether or not the meeting on September 20th, is that also going to be by Zoom? I hope.
Is also what?
Is the meeting on September 20th going to be by Zoom?
Oh, yes. We're not
Thank you.
prepared with the uptick in COVID and everything. We're not prepared yet to take it live completely. Plus, we have so many people from out of the county and out of the state that chime in or tune in. So, yeah, it'll be Zoom. Thank you all.